It all started with the story of three families from the Helios Empire, where in each new generation children with unusual abilities were born. The first family, the L, amazed with their knowledge of the structure of the universe and their ability to process the accumulated experience of humanity. The second Erebos was famous for its valiant warriors, experts in the use of cold weapons and masters of martial arts. And finally, the third one, Leroy, did not have a specific predisposition, but tried to cover as much as possible of diverse skills and abilities from various spheres of life. But one day, a girl named Leticia appeared in this family who, despite all attempts, could not show any abilities in herself, and at the same time she was the eldest daughter. The heiress of the Leroy family was not only completely devoid of talent, but was also no different from ordinary teenagers, neither in intelligence, nor in beauty, nor even in height. In fact, she was the most ordinary girl. Her sister Diana was a shining beauty in high society and amazed everyone with her attractive appearance. Brother Emile many times surpassed all others in intelligence, wisdom, and deep knowledge in various spheres of life. Xavier had the same blood as Leticia in his veins, but he was an outstanding fighter and incredibly skilled with his sharp blade. And even little Irene delighted with fantastic successes in magic and the craft of sorcery, having the makings of strong magic. At the same time, Leticia never envied her brothers and sisters. She admired them, was proud of her relationship, and was unpleasantly shocked when she found out that they did not like her and were ashamed of her. The family perceived the eldest daughter as a stain on their reputation, and at some point the parents decided to abandon their heiress. Her biological father, Marquis Leroy, once summoned his own daughter and announced that he was expelling her from her home. The girl tried to convince him, cried and begged, but the head of the family was adamant and did not change his decision, abandoning the innocent little girl to her fate. The man was stern and said that Leticia could no longer call herself his daughter, since he was rejecting her. Then the Marquis added that she should immediately leave the walls of the family mansion and forget the way back forever. In fact, the young girl was deprived of everything in one moment: a future, family, friends, and hopes for a comfortable existence with a famous surname. The elder sister cried bitter tears and did not understand why fate had treated her so cruelly and mercilessly. Leticia walked along the night corridor of the house that no longer belonged to her and longingly recalled the years of happy, carefree life spent within the walls of the family mansion. The former Leroy stopped in front of the knight she loved to play around when she was still a child. She fantasized that in a moment of danger he would definitely come to life and protect her, but this was not so. The world around was literally splitting into pieces, the fragments of which flew towards the girl and painfully wounded her trembling soul. The society often discussed the young children of the Marquis, who were distinguished not only by their beauty and health, but also by their unusual abilities and talents. And whenever the conversation in high society turned to the heirs of Leroy, at some point someone remembered Leticia, who was deprived of any talents. It was very unpleasant to hear snippets of such conversations, and the girl always shuddered at such speeches. However, the eldest daughter always pretended not to notice this attitude and continued to live her old life because it was not her fault that her abilities had not awakened until now. More than anyone else, Marquis Leroy himself was concerned about the situation. He was very worried about this, and at some point began to think that this girl was not his daughter, but a complete stranger to them. The Marquis noted that there were children in their family who had already shown themselves, and therefore the situation, although unpleasant, was not at all critical, since 4 out of 5 children still had abilities. Leticia began to ask her parents for forgiveness for her lack of any noticeable gift. But the head of the family did not calm down. He tried to extract from his eldest daughter at least some small, even completely useless, but obvious to those around gift. However, the girl could offer nothing to her father to calm his troubled mind and only asked for forgiveness once again. This only made the man even more angry, and he started shouting, accusing his daughter of having a gift for irritating him with endless apologies. His wife tried to distract the Marquis from his bad thoughts, but he continued and said that every time he saw Leticia, he felt deep disappointment and annoyance. Heiress Leroy looked at her parents and suffered because she was constantly accused of something she had nothing to do with, because abilities awakened in everyone suddenly. The girl clutched her dress in her hand as she watched the Marquis search for a way to calm her husband. The sad girl listened to the joy and delight with which her parents began to discuss the upcoming birthday of their second daughter, who had outstanding abilities. Leticia remembered how she used to enjoy her name day, because when the girl was still a child, she did not notice some things. The father, as was his custom, would come to his daughter on such days from early morning, but with each passing year, the smile would leave his face more and more often. And at some point, the head of the family became completely cold with his heiress because time passed and the abilities did not manifest themselves in any way. The girl was sad and hurt, but she could not do anything about it because the appearance of the gift could not be predicted in advance. And now the birthday has turned into a real torture because this holiday meant that another year is behind and there are still no talents. The thought that it was to some extent her fault only grew stronger in her head, although there was no obvious reason to believe so. Leticia literally dreamed of getting any ability just so that her parents wouldn't look at her as someone else's child. And then her brothers would pay more attention to her than to reading smart books. If she had a gift, they would not turn away from their sister as if she were an empty space, avoiding any conversation or simple communication on abstract topics. And even the youngest sister would look at Leticia as her equal, and not with pity and regret. What can I say? Perhaps even the most beautiful of their family, Diana, would have changed her daring and contemptuous look to a more benevolent one. And this awareness of her own guilt constantly grew in the girl, supported by the attitude of her household, driving the unfortunate woman into a dead end. One day, the older sister was walking down the hallway, looking at her feet, and saw the second daughter's red shoes. Leticia raised her head and met her relative's gaze. Instead of greeting her or even the usual contemptuous silence, Diana said that when she walked down the corridor, Leticia was to step aside without reminders or warnings. The girl was used to being treated badly, but rudeness and boorishness were new to her, so she was taken aback when she heard such a phrase. The sister noticed that she was of no use. Moreover, she was constantly underfoot, and she should understand this. Leticia became upset and began to apologize, as she usually did when she had conflicts with her relatives. At first, the beauty of the family's gaze depicted contempt and discontent. But then she raised an eyebrow and asked how long their family must endure this shame within the walls of their home. Diana noted that in their glorious and noble aristocratic family, there had never been a case where a person without abilities was born who now interferes with everyone. The wise Emile even had his own theory about this, from which it followed that Leticia was most likely someone else's child, a mutant, or even a curse in human form. Thoughts about the imperfection of a member of the family hindered Xavier in his endless training and fights. And little Irene could not concentrate on learning new spells. She was so worried about her older sister's failure. Hearing such a harsh stream of humiliating words, Leticia asked her sister to immediately stop this bullying. Diana looked angrily at her relative and asked again, could she really not find at least some gift in herself? Then she came right up to the girl and poked her in the chest with her finger, while she literally screamed that if she didn't have the ability, then she had no place in this house and in their family's life in general. The unfortunate woman tried to say something in her defense, but no one listened to her and only continued to reproach her for her shame and lack of innate gift. Finally, Diana had said everything she could imagine, closed her eyes, and fell silent. The sister ended her psychological attack by almost knocking the unfortunate woman off her feet and walking further down the corridor. As she passed by, the restless relative threw a few more offensive words at the girl. Leticia stood in the middle of the corridor for a while, looking after this impudent beauty, and then headed to her room. An hour later, there was a polite knock on the door of the elder sister's chambers, and the girl allowed entry. It was a cheerful and contented servant named Mary, who joyfully greeted the young mistress. However, the heiress, Leroy, was clearly in a bad mood, given all the events happening around her. The maid brought the mistress's favorite tea and clearly tried to somehow brighten up the girl's difficult everyday life. Leticia thanked the caring maid, but said that her efforts were in vain, since she planned to go to bed as early as possible today, so that this day would end as quickly as possible. Mary understood that her mistress was having a hard time and remained silent for a while, but then she decided to ask her questions. The maid sat down next to her on the bed and asked what had happened that made the young lady change her daily routine. But the older sister did not answer. She simply lay silently and painfully recalled the events of the past day. An image of a father appeared before her eyes, accusing his daughter of lacking abilities and wanting to find at least some kind of gift. Then Leticia remembered her mother, who had reassured the Marquis by saying that they had other children who were more worthy of his attention, but the most painful memories were connected with Diana, the beauty of the Leroy family, who treated her own sister so rudely and harshly. Finally, from somewhere far away, the heiress of the family heard the maid's words and answered the question with a question. Why hadn't her abilities awakened yet, like everyone else in the family? Mary blushed and thoughtfully pronounced her mistress's name, and then fell silent. Then Leticia continued and pointed out that all of her brothers and sisters had either an innate gift or some kind of outstanding ability, and that is why she felt like an outsider in this house. Their light does not warm her soul at all, but only burns out the life in her, like the scorching sun in the middle of the desert. Usually people with gifts are chosen and rare, but in this family being an ordinary person meant being an outcast, and thoughts about this tormented Leticia from her earliest years. In addition, the attitude of household members, for example, the same Diana, destroyed the ground under her feet and made her doubt her own strength, lowering her self-esteem. The older sister clutched the pillow and groaned softly from her heavy thoughts. But then the saving voice of Mary was heard, who suggested that the girl probably had a gift. It was just either not visible or hidden somewhere deep inside. These were pleasant thoughts, and they immediately made her feel warm and happy. But when Leticia asked what kind of ability it was or where it could hide, the maid did not know what to answer. Then the elder sister got up and sat on the bed, and suddenly asked the maid about her poor brother, about how the boy was feeling. Mary replied that her relative was in a stable, serious condition and could not recover, but the disease was not able to prevail, and doctors were recommending a very rare and expensive. Leticia listened to this information with concern, realizing how hard it must be for this cheerful girl to live, but she didn't show it. Without thinking twice, the older sister went to the dressing table and took out a box with her jewelry. She suggested that Mary take them for herself in order to save her brother with the money she received. The maid immediately began to protest, because she was afraid of the reaction of the head of the family, because if he found out about this, then everyone would be bad, especially the unfortunate maid. Finally, the girl took the mistress's hands in hers and began to talk about how she was already happy that there were such kind and sympathetic people in the world who were ready to do so much for others. Mary closed her eyes and added that serving such a compassionate person as Leticia was a great honor for her and the highest reward. The older sister was very touched by such a confession and did not know what to answer to such flattering words, because usually in this house she was criticized and offended. Then the maid dreamily suggested that it would be great if at some point money started falling from the sky, then she would definitely not refuse it. Moreover, Mary laughed and noted that in that case many people would solve their problems and become happier. Leticia smiled too, imagining the problems everyone would have if money was just lying around on the road. Meanwhile, evening fell on the Leroy family mansion, and lights began to come on in the windows. Looking at the evening twilight, the hostess noticed that it was time for her assistant to get ready to go home so as not to walk down the street in pitch darkness. Mary blushed again and replied that her working day was not over yet and she could not go home so early. But then Leticia reminded the maid about her brother, who was sick and probably eagerly awaiting his sister at home, after which Mary agreed to finish early and thanked her mistress. Finally, the mistress wished the maid to find as much money as possible on the street, which puzzled the maid. Then the older sister laughed and suggested that she should take a small bag with her to collect gold coins. Mary was amused by this proposal and imagined herself walking down the street with a heavy bag full of money. Returning home from work, the maid turned around and looked at the windows where her young mistress's room was, and she felt sorry for the poor thing because she suffered so much from conflicts in the family. The girl remembered that the mistress had always been kind and gentle to her and had never forced her to work hard and had always been accommodating to the simple worker. Mary walked and thought that she must somehow please the hostess, for example, cook something delicious. Suddenly, a bright sparkle caught her attention, and bending down, the surprised maid saw a coin lying on the ground. The girl picked up the find and examined it carefully. Indeed, in her fingers was a real jewel made of pure gold. Mary stood and twirled the sparkling disc in her hands. She could not believe what had just happened because the object was lying in plain sight, literally underfoot. The image of Leticia immediately appeared in my mind, who, with all her heart, albeit jokingly, wished to find money on the street, and this was very strange. The maid had never encountered such a phenomenon before, and so she assumed that it was just a coincidence, but suspicions crept into her soul. The older sister watched as the handsome young man actively wielded a sharp blade, performing increasingly complex and dexterous fencing exercises. The fighter took a moment to reflect and shared his dreams with the girl that he sincerely wanted to become a knight of the emperor himself. Leticia raised her fists and said that from this day on she would perceive her fiancé exclusively as a valiant warrior, and one day he would receive the desired status. Several years later, when the boy had grown stronger, matured, and trained, he went to take the exam to become an imperial knight, and the girl spent the entire day dreaming about her victorious hero. Then the elder sister turned away from her memories of the past and asked Mary to give her a handkerchief. The maid was floating in the clouds of her memories, replaying yesterday's discovery in her head over and over again. Finally, the hostess's voice brought the girl out of her thoughtful rummaging through her thoughts in my head. The maid started, realizing that she had been very distracted and had not heard the young mistress's order. Leticia asked what she could be thinking about so deeply, but the girl said nothing about the coin in her pocket and only replied that she had simply gone into herself and listened. Finally, Mary understood what she was asked to do and handed the handkerchief to her mistress. The maid asked if the mistress needed anything else, but the elder sister replied that she did not need anything else. As Leticia walked down the stairs, she met a young girl at the very bottom. Diana, of course, was beautiful purely externally, but her cold and contemptuous look spoiled all the beauty and added a shade of depravity to the image. The sister folded her arms across her chest and asked where Leticia was heading at such an early hour, to which the heiress Leroy replied that she wanted to see Levan, since he had an exam today. To which the arrogant girl coldly asked why she needed this. Sincerely surprised by such a bold question, the heiress Leroy could not find anything to answer, but only stared at her relative in amazement. But Diana didn't calm down. She came up close to her sister and even extended her hand to her chest, continuing to say the phrase that she had nothing to do there. A sudden surge of anger washed over Leticia and she clenched her fist in anger, but then quickly pulled herself together. The older sister asked the offender why she couldn't go to her fiancé to support him on this important day, because it was normal and completely natural. To this, Diana replied that it would be better for the girl to stay at home and not go anywhere. This would be the best help for a person who is not indifferent to her. Then the relative turned and walked away, leaving her bewildered sister in confusion. Despite the warning from the haughty heiress Leroy, Leticia got into the carriage and headed straight to the exam site. And while she was driving, she constantly thought about what was happening in her family and how her relatives were behaving. Finally, the carriage reached the desired place, and the coachman informed the lady that she could get out, and soon the girl left the vehicle, using the step. After looking around, Leticia began to search for her lover because she did not know where exactly he was now. Some time passed, during which the older sister wandered around the territory of the educational institution in search of Levan. She constantly looked back. It seemed to her that he was somewhere. Finally, she saw him. The guy was dressed in a dress uniform and looked just great, but his face expressed grief and some sadness. Leticia joyfully welcomed the brave warrior she had been looking for here for so long and wanted to support him on his path to becoming a man. Levan asked why she came, and the girl replied that she wanted to be with him at such a crucial moment so that he would feel calmer. However, the guy did not seem happy about his bride's visit. On the contrary, he seemed upset and quietly said that it would have been better for her to stay at home and wait for him there. Leticia seemed puzzled and began to apologize. For some reason, everyone perceived her idea to support the groom very badly, and even the guy himself was clearly not happy. Heiress Leroy immediately offered to leave, but the guy said that she should follow him and moved forward. The older sister tried to figure out what was going on, but Levan simply walked ahead without saying a word. Finally, Leticia came to terms with what was happening and remembered her gift, which she had specially embroidered for the winner as a form of support. But the knight candidate walked quite quickly, so giving the handkerchief turned out to be not as easy a task as she initially thought. At some point she got tired of running after Levan, and the girl simply stopped, calling the guy by name and saying that she wanted to tell him something. However, the knight candidate, without turning around, began to talk about her gift, which had not yet manifested itself in any way. These words confused the Marquis's daughter. Suddenly the groom turned around and added with bitterness in his voice that he was upset precisely because of her failure in this matter. Leticia didn't know what to answer. All this time she thought that her chosen one was far from constantly demanding of her in terms of abilities, but it turns out that she was cruelly mistaken about him. The unfortunate noblewoman crumpled the handkerchief in her hand and squeezed her dress. She didn't want to be here anymore. For all this long time, from the moment they met, Levan was her support and a ray of light in the kingdom of evil darkness. However, apparently, this dream was destined to soon fade away. The knightly candidate examined the handkerchief and reproached the bride for wasting her free time on trifles like embroidery instead of searching for the hidden gift within herself. Leticia lowered her eyes and quietly said that she had put her soul into embroidering the green pattern on the fabric, and then apologized again, but this did not stop the groom, and he still returned the item. The guy stood there for a while longer, looking at the Marquis's daughter with empty eyes, and then said that it was time for him to go, which almost brought his chosen one to tears. As he left, Levan turned around and asked if she knew of any reason why he should stay around her. These offensive words once again touched the girl to the quick, because she could not control the appearance of abilities. And where did that cheerful guy go, who was so happy in her company and always enjoyed spending time with her? Deep in thought, Leticia walked along the alley towards the exit and did not look ahead at all, but a stranger was walking towards her along the road. The Marquis's daughter noticed the obstacle too late and tried to avoid the collision, but she failed. Heiress Leroy closed her eyes from yet another unpleasantness. Bad things had been happening to her constantly lately. Leticia realized that the man had caught her and not let her fall. In response, she opened one eye and immediately began to ask for forgiveness and say that she had not looked around when she walked. The stranger was no less confused and embarrassed than the girl. He felt awkward hugging a random aristocrat right in the middle of the road. The Marquis's heiress noticed his hand, covered in fresh blood, and asked if everything was okay with him. The young man hastened to assure the girl that everything was fine, especially when she began to doubt his words. The stranger added that all these were minor details, because the main thing was that the lady was not harmed during this incident. After which the guy turned around and walked away quickly. The Marquis's daughter called out to her savior in such a plaintive voice that he could not resist and turned around. Leticia quickly approached and handed the man a gift that she had personally embroidered for her fiancé. Perhaps the piece of fabric would be useful at least in such a situation. Taking the handkerchief with both hands, the girl, with an unhappy look, handed it to the unknown gentleman and sadly asked him to accept this modest gift. The guy felt very awkward accepting souvenirs from a random passerby, but he saw that this was extremely important for the young aristocrat. Closing his eyes, he thanked the noblewoman for this accessory and carefully placed the handkerchief in the inside pocket of his jacket. However, this gesture made Leticia even more confused, and she immediately began to protest. It seemed strange to her that the guy, instead of wiping away the blood, simply hid the square of cloth. The stranger calmly replied that he could not stain such a nice souvenir, as he considered it indecent towards a lady. Then the man blushed a little and added that for him, after their meeting, this scarf became more valuable than gold. Leticia was very surprised to hear that her work was called a treasure. She, of course, appreciated her work and time invested in embroidery, but she could not imagine that a stranger was capable of this. The Marquis's heiress laughed at the thought that she was capable of creating expensive things. Then the girl took the handkerchief from the hand of the unknown gentleman and, without thinking twice, began to bandage his wound. The guy was noticeably upset when he saw that the gift was now completely dirty, and he hurried to tell the girl about it. However, Leticia hastened to assure the young man that she was very pleased to somehow repay him for his kindness, and she had no intention of returning the handkerchief. The bandaged wrist was indeed no longer bleeding, but the Marquis's daughter was in no hurry to let go of the warm and strong hand. For some time the young people looked at each other attentively, while the aristocrat looked very happy and contented, and the nobleman looked confused and surprised. Finally, the guy, not hiding his embarrassment, asked the name of the unfamiliar lady who turned out to be such a skilled nurse. The Marquis's daughter smiled broadly and said her name, Leticia, and then the family name, Leroy. Shortly before this meeting, a knighting exam was taking place on the training ground for a man who accidentally collided with Leticia, and his opponent fell and rolled on the ground from a powerful blow. The guy calmly looked at the fallen man and seemed to be thinking about something of his own. The audience actively discussed the candidate's maneuvers and also recalled his incomplete social status, since by blood he was the son of a duke, but had not yet undergone the rite of inheritance of the title. The difficulty was that the young man could not afford to carry out this expensive ritual due to the poverty of his family, and the elite was extremely reluctant to accept talented but poor nobles. When the boy was taking the exam for the first time, it was at that very time that his mother, the Duchess, suddenly died. The second attempt to pass the test ended with creditors raiding the house and robbing the already modest family blind. Therefore, the stranger was prepared for the upcoming negative consequences, but he could not think of any other options to break into high society. He looked at his hand, covered with fresh abrasions and wounds as a result of the fight, and thought that his whole life was a series of difficulties and failures. And the Duke's son also thought that he was very tired of fighting and felt that all his strength had practically run out. The boy hated himself for this weakness, and deep down he believed that a descendant of a noble family should show more fortitude and determination, regardless of the circumstances. And so, when he was walking from another fight, he accidentally ran into an unfamiliar girl. Reflexes allowed the guy to catch the stranger and save her from an inevitable fall onto the hard floor slabs, but at that moment the wound on his palm opened up. The girl was pretty and very sweet, constantly apologizing and making excuses for her own absent-mindedness. Apparently, she was also as self-absorbed as the knight candidate and tried to make amends for her guilt as quickly as possible. The Duke's son was a little surprised to meet a lady who so easily assigned herself the blame for such a minor incident as a collision. The guy was amazed by her gift, because it is not often that you meet an aristocrat who can do such a delicate and precise job of embroidering a green pattern on a small handkerchief. The young man really didn't want to spoil this beautiful handiwork, but the girl got ahead of him. During his difficult life, the Duke's eldest son met many people, but there were very few among them who were so kind and affectionate. The guy was pleasantly surprised, because before that he usually encountered the negative sides of people and had already begun to forget what real mercy and the ability to empathize look like. And when the girl touched his hand, the Duke's son felt incredible warmth spreading throughout his body. Over the years of endless trials, his heart had hardened, but as soon as he met a sweet angel on his way, he felt alive again. Then he finally decided to ask the stranger's name because he couldn't leave such a decent person nameless. The girl smiled and introduced herself. Her name was Leticia Leroy. The guy looked at his hand. It no longer hurt, but on the contrary, it now felt incredibly light and strong. It was a wonderful and unexpected acquaintance. The young lady literally beamed with delight that she had managed to help someone and that her creation had not been in vain. The Duke's son caught himself thinking that lately he had been experiencing nothing but troubles and misfortunes, and then suddenly there was incredible luck and a pleasant acquaintance. After some time, the guy returned to the area where the fencing exam was taking place and was surprised at how easily he managed to defeat his opponent this time, knocking the sword out of his hand. The examiners loudly acknowledged the complete and unconditional victory of Enoch of the Achilles family. And then, to the boys' surprise, it was announced that the Duke's heir had passed the last of the entrance exams and was gaining access to the final test to increase his social status. The panel of stern judges also mentioned that the candidate had won despite his injury, and it is precisely the ability to fight and win through pain that is the quality of a true knight. It was getting dark, but the lights had not yet been lit at the Leroy estate, as it was still quite light and there was enough daylight. Mary joyfully greeted her mistress, whom she had been waiting for so long from her trip to the city. But the maid immediately dropped everything as soon as she saw that the young mistress's hand was covered with stains of dried blood. She began to examine her fingers and wonder how she could hurt herself in the city. But Leticia hastened to reassure the maid, saying that she was fine and that it was not she who had hurt herself. Mary immediately calmed down as soon as she learned that the owner had not received any damage and offered to immediately wash her new handkerchief, which she had noticed during the day. However, the Marquis's heiress smiled and said that there was no need for this, since he was stained with blood. She felt good about remembering the boy she had given some medical attention to and taken care of his wound. Catching the maid's surprised look, Leticia replied that she had given the accessory to a person who needed it more than she did, and besides, it was not her last scarf. Mary reluctantly agreed with the hostess's arguments and returned to cleaning, but then remembered that she wanted to know what gift the lady was planning to give to her second sister, Diana. But the Marquis's daughter raised her finger and replied that she understood the girl's curiosity, but did not want to reveal her secret ahead of time. There were many guests at the birthday party of the beauty from the Leroy family, and everyone happily congratulated the heiress on this holiday. In her response, Diana thanked those gathered for their attention, warmth, and care, and added that she had never had such a vibrant name day celebration. Leticia made her way among the guests to personally congratulate her sister on this special day, but she could not find her. Finally, the search was crowned with success. And she saw her second daughter, who stood out from those around her with her beauty and brilliance. The Marquis's daughter addressed Diana by name with a smile and thus attracted her attention. Seeing Leticia, the birthday girl's face immediately changed and became sad and wary. She rudely asked her sister why she came and what she wanted. Young Leroy replied that she wanted to congratulate the heiress on this bright holiday, to which the girl uttered cold words of gratitude. Then the older sister handed over a box with a gift and accompanied it with a congratulatory phrase. Diana immediately covered her face with a fan and looked strangely at the object frozen in Leticia's hands, and her eyes expressed horror and extreme hostility. This silent scene dragged on for quite some time because those around began to pay attention to the two sisters. It was obvious that the birthday girl was afraid of the gift, but a crowd of her girlfriends had already gathered around, and they all repeated that they really wanted to know what was hidden there and asked to open the box immediately. Inside was a large, bright brooch with a huge green stone in an elegant frame with a bow. One of the noblewomen noted that such decorations were very popular several years ago, but have now gone out of fashion. But another noted that it does not matter, because the product is really beautiful. Diana silently listened to the various comments from random viewers and continued to examine the souvenir. Finally, the birthday girl interrupted her train of thought and abruptly slammed the box with the decoration shut. The woman standing next to the Marquis's daughter said that if she had known about this gift, she would have made another surprise herself. Diana asked, "Why?" Then the lady took out her present. It turned out to be a brooch, which the birthday girl had once praised for its beauty and high level of detail. The heiress of the Marquis immediately put on the accessory and admired its elegance and shine, and also added that she would take care of it with all her might. Everyone clapped happily and began to congratulate Diana on her wonderful wardrobe update, and only Leticia stood there sad and almost crying. Suddenly, the birthday girl looked at her relative with pity because she had prepared for this day and chosen the present herself. Diana then invited those around her to continue the celebration without her and said that she and her sister needed to take all the gifts to her room. And while the two sisters slowly moved towards the doors, the guests followed them with long glances and talked about something. As long as the girls remained in full view of the crowd of visiting nobles, Diana behaved calmly and with restraint. But as soon as the Leroy heirs disappeared behind the doors, the younger sister pounced on Leticia with anger and reproaches. The birthday girl grabbed the box with the green brooch and literally hit the unfortunate girl in the chest with it, saying that this souvenir had ruined the whole party and that she should never give her anything like that again. The eldest daughter was very upset and asked how she could leave her beloved sister without a gift on such a day. In response, Diana shouted that if Leticia could not restrain herself, she should have given some other item because this one had long since gone out of fashion, which must be monitored. The heiress of the Marquis lowered her hands, with which she was clutching the box. She was very hurt and offended by the fact that all attempts to improve relations in the family had failed. To top it all off, the angry birthday girl added that she no longer wants to see Leticia at her future birthday parties. The girl tried to object that she was part of the family, especially the older sister, and to miss such special events was the height of indecency and bad manners. When Diana heard the mention of the Leroy family, she immediately began to smirk and reminded the unfortunate woman that she was an indelible stain on the reputation of their noble house. Leticia replied that she did not understand what was being discussed and asked her sister to express herself more clearly. The birthday girl closed her eyes and replied that, in addition to the lack of any gift, her relative also lacked intelligence and resourcefulness, since she allowed herself such antics. Her hand tightly clutched the hard box where the brooch rested, which the girl had been thinking about for several months, because her only desire was to please her ungrateful sister. But Leticia wasn't angry at the birthday girl. She was directing the aggression at herself and felt ashamed that she had made Diana feel uncomfortable on such a significant day. Meanwhile, an unusual and rare guest arrived at the mansion whom few expected to see that day. It was Mr. Seos, a longtime friend of the Leroy family, who visited his acquaintances only on exceptional occasions. The Marquis greeted the nobleman and announced that he was very pleased that the man had found time in his busy schedule to attend the birthday of his second daughter. Seos replied that he could not miss such an important day and smiled kindly when the head of the clan introduced him to the birthday girl, who soon approached them. Diana smiled warmly and literally glowed with happiness. She gave her name and expressed sincere joy about the visit of such a serious person to their home. Casting an irritated glance at his eldest daughter, the Marquis ordered her to also come up and greet the guest. The girl came up and stopped at some distance, not daring to come closer, and then introduced herself. A few minutes later, Leticia asked everyone for forgiveness and, citing poor health, asked permission to leave the celebration. The father was very unhappy with her request and reproached his daughter for not even being able to celebrate her own sister's name day with her presence. Seos had been watching the girl closely all this time, and kindness and good attitude could be seen in his gaze. Then Diana asked permission to leave the men to join her peers and continue celebrating her birthday, to which she immediately received consent. And while the sisters were leaving, and the head of the house continued to tell something to the visiting guest, he looked at the girls and thought about something of his own. Seos drew the Marquis's attention to the fact that his second daughter was receiving maximum attention and care, to which the man replied that this was indeed the case, and that she was very important to the family. And then Diana's father added that this was what distinguished her from his eldest daughter Leticia, and then the guest asked what was wrong with her. The owner of the house replied that many years had passed since she was born, but not a single ability had awakened in her, and these words made Seos think deeply. For centuries, the Leroy family has been known for its outstanding magicians, scientists, fighters, and representatives of other directions, where blood relatives occupied leading positions. And there have never been any cases where children were born into a family who were deprived of any outstanding talents. Seos asked the Marquis about Leticia again, and then expressed a desire to personally talk to the girl, but not today, but another time, when the time was right. The guest found it very strange that such an outstanding family had produced the most ordinary girl, and he wanted to understand this unusual situation. Once upon a time, many, many years ago, when the Leroy family was going through hard times, the Marquise was carrying a child under her heart. At the same time, the new project of the head of the family failed, and the family found itself on the brink of financial disaster. To top it all off, the birth was very difficult, and as a result of the birth of her first child, Leticia, the doctors told the Marquise that she would never be able to become a mother again. However, after some time, the head of the Leroy clan managed to conclude an extremely profitable agreement, and financial problems left their house forever. In addition, the mother's body began to recover rapidly, and very soon the woman regained her lost health. And with each year the family grew stronger and became richer and more powerful, growing not only with material goods, but also with new children, of which there were already 5. Naturally, all this time the head of the family was asking himself the same question: what was the reason for this unprecedented rise in success, well-being, and health? The result of these reflections was the parents' opinion that the source of luck was Diana, their second daughter, since in terms of time, it was her birth that coincided with the joys that had befallen them. The Marquis expressed this idea during his next meeting with Mr. Seos, insisting that their family's success began with her birth. The guest listened attentively to the owner of the house and drank aromatic tea, and then asked what unique ability Diana had. The Marquise proudly said that her gift was to create a rain of flower petals, usually from red roses. and while the head of the house was enthusiastically talking about this ability, Seos thought that his friend was literally obsessed with the second daughter and asked about Leticia because she seemed nice to him. The Marquis simply waved it off and called the girl a shameful stain on the family's biography, meaningless and useless, to which the guest noted that one cannot be so cruel to one's own children. The owner of the house replied that although she was his blood, in the eyes of others she was inferior, and therefore he was even thinking about ending her engagement. Seos was very surprised by such words and asked his friend again if he really wanted to destroy the alliance between the families that had been connecting Leticia and Levan for many years. To which the Marquis coldly added that it would not be exactly a break. He would simply exchange Leticia for Diana in this agreement, since, in his opinion, this would be correct. The guest was outraged by this idea and said that if the head of the family, Leroy, carried out his plan, he would make a terrible mistake that would be impossible to correct. Barrett did not answer his respected friend's objection, and then Seos said that it was time for him to leave, but before that he would like to take a walk around the Marquis's estate. The owner offered to keep the gentleman company, but he politely declined, citing the fact that he had been there many times and wanted to walk alone. The Marquis watched his guest and thought that their conversation had not been as pleasant as he had planned. The man's memory flashed back to when his first daughter was still a baby. Then 2 moments coincided. The Marquise was holding the baby in her arms and telling her that a letter had arrived demanding that she pay off the debt. Barrett became very angry about this and unconsciously began to associate the problems with the first child. But by the time Diana was born, things were looking up, and that also created an unbreakable bond within the man. Especially when the head of the clan received the long-awaited letter, which stated that he had agreed to conclude an extremely profitable deal with him. And the young father automatically, without thinking, attributed all further successes in the family's life to the birth of his second child. Now Barrett's thoughts were occupied with how to discuss with Marquis L, as delicately as possible, the planned rearrangement of brides so that Diana would marry Levan instead of Leticia. Sometime later, when the family was having dinner at the table, the father asked his second daughter how she had spent the day. The girl smiled and told about how they had a nice conversation with the heir of the Marquis of Elem, drank tea, and had a fun time. Leticia, who was sitting opposite, almost dropped her cutlery at this news because Levan was her fiancé. Barrett said that it was very good, and Diana added that the guy gave her a souvenir for the past holiday and apologized for not coming to her birthday. The second daughter fixed her hair and showed her new bracelet on her wrist, which she received from the son of the Marquis of Elem. The older sister stopped eating. She sat with her mouth wide open and could not believe that this was really happening to her. It turns out that Levan came not to her today, but to her relative. Leticia sat at the table, but did not hear how her brothers and sisters vied with each other to tell their father about their successes in their studies, magic, fencing, and knowledge of the world. The girl felt unwell, because it was a real nightmare to live in a house where not only did your family and friends dislike you, but they even allowed themselves to openly knock the last support out from under your feet. Finally, unable to bear the abuse, the eldest daughter stood up and asked permission to leave the shared meal, citing poor health. The father gave silent consent and watched coldly as his own daughter, reeling from nervous shock, left the table. When the door closed behind the older sister, the man turned to Diana and asked what she thought of the young heir of the Marquis of Elem. And without waiting for an answer, he added that he wanted to discuss with her the idea of concluding a marriage union between his second daughter and Levan. Hearing these words, silence reigned at the table. Brothers Emile and Xavier were clearly shocked by such a proposal for their relative. Irene's mouth dropped open in astonishment, and she asked her father to repeat what he had just said. The head of the family slowly wiped his mouth with a napkin and noted that he intended to talk to Levan's father in the near future and break off the engagement between his son and Leticia, and then proposed. The girl did not know what to answer. Of course, she liked the young and handsome young man, but she had never seriously thought about marrying him because he had been engaged to her sister for many years. The Lady of the Flower Rain was silent for a while, and then she made a decision and told it to her father. After some time, Leticia ran into her sister at the exit of the house, and she, as usual, asked where the first daughter was going. When Diana heard that her relative was planning to meet her fiancé, Levan, she smiled and began to giggle. And then she closed her eyes and began to sigh. This behavior seemed strange, and Leticia asked, "What's wrong?" But the sister did not answer but continued to grimace. Then the girl repeated her question in a raised tone. For quite some time now, a painful thought has settled in the soul of the elder sister, as if she had fallen into a sticky web, which is not so easy to see, but its strong threads secretly fetter her every movement. Suddenly, Diana took a step and came very close to her relative, although before she tried to keep as much distance as possible. Moreover, the heiress of the Marquis put her hand to her mouth and began to whisper that she really felt very sorry for her sister, although the face and behavior of the mistress of flowers said the opposite. Leticia timidly asked to explain these words, but the beauty only smirked and remained silent. Then Diana did something she never allowed herself to do. She touched her shoulder and adjusted the hem of her dress, adding that these words were just a joke that should not. To top it all off, the girl waved to her sister and wished her a joyful meeting. Leticia knew that the clouds were gathering over her, but she didn't know what was going to happen or what she should do in such a situation. Meanwhile, the weather outside was excellent, and nothing foreshadowed trouble. The bride was getting ready for another meeting with her groom, but in her head she kept replaying her recent conversation with her sister. Finally, the first daughter, Leroy, arrived at the scene and opened the door with her hand to enter the hall where Levan was waiting for her. The guy was sitting on the sofa and drinking tea. He sluggishly greeted the guest, and his face reflected sadness and melancholy. Leticia was genuinely glad to see the young man. She really had warm feelings for him, and when she entered, she immediately asked how he was doing. The son of the Marquis of Elam was clearly not in a good mood and continued to drink tea and answered the question with the excuse that everything was as usual for him. Then the girl asked him directly why, when he had last come to their house, he had only come to see Diana, but had not even looked in on his fiancé, although she had missed him. After which Leticia added that such an act upset her very much, and she still cannot calm down. However, Levan remained silent, and the girl decided to change the subject, smiled happily and asked about his training in military craft. Instead of answering, the groom began to reproach the girl for frivolity and carelessness, which greatly surprised the heiress of the Leroy family. The guy, in turn, noted that one cannot be so blind and not notice the obvious, and then directly said that he was worried about the fact that the heads of their families were discussing calling off the engagement. In shock, the girl grabbed the hem of her dress and squeezed it tightly, after which she began to mumble that this was impossible, that this couldn't be, and how could this be? Levan looked coldly at his bride and replied that these were not the words he expected from her, and if she had no others, she would be better off returning to her home. A chill ran down Leticia's spine, and she asked her fiancé if he agreed with the divorce and if they could influence anything themselves. The guy closed his eyes, lowered his head, and remained silent. Two feelings were fighting inside him: the memory of past years spent together and the pressure of those around him. After all, just recently, the bride and groom were happy being in each other's company and enjoying joint walks, entertainment, and small joys. Finally, Levan began to speak. He said that the days of their carefree childhood were gone forever. It was time to grow up, stop being childish, and make serious decisions. Then the young man added that Leticia must understand one simple thing: doing the right thing is not always easy and pleasant. Deep down, the Marquis's daughter already understood what her fiancé was getting at, and bitter tears immediately began to flow down her cheeks, but she still asked what he wanted to say with this phrase. The guy stood up silently and looked longingly at his bride, with whom they had spent so many bright days. And then he replied that the best solution in the current situation would be to dissolve their marriage. These words literally burned Leticia from the inside, after which the whole world that she had built around this wonderful man crumbled like a house of cards. But at the same time, clarity came to the Marquise's heiress, because all her sister's words, hints, and the silence of her household, all of this now fit together into a big, terrible puzzle. A cold horror began to cover the ex-bride like a dark veil, because it turns out that all this time those around her, and even Levan himself, knew perfectly well. The light carriage slowly drove along the bright green alley, illuminated by the rays of the daytime sun. But inside, there was a girl who was biting her nails with excitement because her whole life was rapidly rushing into the abyss. All sorts of questions flashed through Leticia's head. When did it all start? How could she not notice it? Why no one told her anything right away, but preferred to hide it, and so on. Suddenly, the Marquis's daughter had an unexpected idea and knocked on the glass, indicating to the coachman that they should stop in town on the way home and buy something there. After some time, the carriage stopped right at the edge of the market square, where there were countless stalls selling all sorts of items. When the girl left the carriage and stepped onto the stone pavement, the coachman asked if she could handle the shopping without a maid, to which the girl answered in the affirmative and went to the counters. Even during her childhood, Leticia often came here with her family to shop, and the children happily ran between the rows. Little has changed since then. Meanwhile, there was lively trading going on at the market. People were actively communicating, looking at the assortment, and making purchases. The girl looked at families with children and remembered herself at their age. At that time, they were all a big friendly company. Leticia's attention was drawn to a local attraction where those who wanted to could test their aim. The Marquis's heiress remembered that this was once one of her favorite games, which she often played. The girl then saw the children trying to persuade her recent acquaintance to give them some money to try his luck, but he refused and said that it was all a ploy to make a profit. Suddenly, the Marquis's daughter stepped forward and said that she was ready to pay for their attempt with her coin. The guy looked at the girl and immediately remembered her, because they had met the day before on the territory of the school for nights. The dark-haired sister immediately took advantage of the situation and began to thank the stranger with joyful delight for the unexpected gift. Leal then quickly grabbed the coin from the outstretched hand and turned to her brother, whose name was Jan, saying that they were very lucky. The young man covered his face with his hand, ashamed that his relatives, without waiting for the elder's permission, had taken advantage of Leticia's offer, and she was clearly happy about it. Meanwhile, the boy and girl went to the attraction. They stopped in front of a large target and began to look at each other hesitantly because they had no experience. The Marquis's daughter asked about the children, and the candidate for knighthood replied that they were his younger brother and sister, very active, and therefore brought him not only joy, but also trouble. The guy wanted to say something else, but he thought about it. It was obvious that he was uncomfortable being in such a situation. For a while, the young man simply remained silent and looked at Leticia, whom he did not expect to see here at all. Then the older brother folded his hands behind his back and said that he should have done it earlier, but somehow he didn't think of it right away. After which the young man bowed and introduced himself in full form, stating his name and status, Enoch, son of Duke Achilles. Now there was no longer any uncertainty on the guy's face. He had completed all the formalities and felt much better. The aristocrat opened her eyes wide, blushed, and also introduced herself, Leticia, daughter of the Marquis Leroy. The young man smiled and hastened to assure the noblewoman that he remembered well her first and last name, which she mentioned at their first meeting. At this time, the brother and sister finally agreed on who would try their luck first. This time, the girl was ahead and hurried to make the throw. Achilles invited Leticia to compete in throwing, but the girl immediately became embarrassed, saying that usually everyone is lucky in such games except her. Suddenly, the young people heard a joyful cry. It was Leal, who, to everyone's surprise, hit the target right on target, and her brother Jan could not believe his eyes. The older ones were also extremely surprised because the kids had just won the main prize, a bag of flour. Leticia smiled and said that she was very pleased to see the joy on the children's faces, but even more pleased that she had contributed to it. Enoch said that children's delight was truly a serious reward for any work, and his brother and sister looked at each other and still could not believe what had happened. Then the children remembered that they had forgotten to introduce themselves. The first to respectfully introduce herself was the girl Liel from the Achilles clan. Jan also tried to perform the required ritual, but his sister immediately interrupted him and introduced herself, calling him a spoiled and lazy child. And while Leticia was introducing herself, Enoch's sister looked at her carefully. The Marquis's daughter asked what she was thinking about at that moment, because her gaze seemed very mysterious to her. Instead of answering, Leal grabbed her older brother and new acquaintance by the arms and said that their meeting today was a gift from fate, and therefore they simply had to have a lot of fun. Enoch shouldered the prize for his accurate throw, and the girls began to think about what they should do next. The first idea was to put on a funny mask and show it to others, which was quite funny. The company then had fun and fooled around until the evening, and when it was time to say goodbye, Leal invited Leticia to their home and promised to bake a pie for her visit. However, Jan objected that if the Marquis's daughter decided to try this treat, she would certainly get poisoned, so he would better prepare the dish himself. The noblewoman blushed and became embarrassed, and then said that it was not at all necessary to strain oneself so much, and especially to quarrel because of her person. Then the children stopped arguing and immediately fell silent, which was surprising for Leticia because they listened to her, and before that, very few of the aristocrats took her seriously. Enoch said that they would be very happy to see the Marquis's daughter in their home because she was now a friend of the Achilles family. The girl was very pleased with this attention because these people looked at her as an equal and interesting person. The carriage returned home late, when the full moon had already risen, but this did not bother the young noblewoman much. Leticia sat in the carriage and thought that she had not had so much fun for a long time. She especially liked the feeling of being in the family circle, where you are respected, appreciated, and listened. Once upon a time, a long time ago, her own family treated her just as warmly, and the house was full of joy and fun. And even Diana was once affectionate and kind, showed love and care for her older sister, and treated her completely differently than she does now. Then Leticia began to think about the son of Duke Aquilus, and what a happy family the young aristocrat had. Soon the carriage drove up to the house, and the girl, realizing what had happened, walked along the night path straight to the door. The older sister walked along the alley towards the light from the windows and thought that she also had close people, but it was difficult to call them a close-knit family. The next morning, the Marquis called his eldest daughter to his office. The man looked clearly displeased and irritated. Barrett accused Leticia of daring to contact a family of absolute losers without his knowledge, and added that the girl should have no more contacts with the Achilles family. The daughter wanted to object, but her father abruptly cut off his heiress in mid-sentence and said that he did not want to hear anything from someone who brought nothing but bad luck into their home. The young noblewoman remembered the face of Enoch, the Duke's eldest son, and his invitation to visit his family's home. Why did his father call him a loser when the guy looked quite respectable and behaved quite decently? The young man was sweet and friendly, and also showed respect and reverence. Unlike Leroy's household, so why should she humiliate herself by depriving herself of communication with him? After some time, Leticia went to an unexpected meeting with a friend of her family, Mr. Sayos. The gray-haired old man was sincerely glad to see her and praised her for the fact that the girl managed to come to him at the first call, without delay. Looking at the girl's friendly face, the man said that he wanted to discuss one very important issue with her. Sayos noted that she herself had probably thought about this many times over the past years, namely about her abilities. Leticia was surprised by such a topic for dialogue, and the noblewoman's insides sank because she was used to the fact that those around her usually began to blame her for all the troubles and failures. Talking about her non-existent gift, standing in the middle of a green alley under the overhanging branches of trees, the girl, as usual, began to justify herself and apologize. Sayos said that the world around us is not as simple as it might seem at first glance, and sometimes, in order to understand and comprehend something, years of training and personal experience are needed. Then the man invited the girl to share a meal with him at the table, because it was difficult for him to stand on his feet for a long time due to his advanced age. Leticia sat down, took a cup of tea, and, looking at a family friend, frankly admitted that she had no abilities, which everyone had known for a long time. Sayos looked at the tea and saw a petal fall from a tree onto the surface and added that it was too early to draw such conclusions because she was so young. Perhaps something was already happening around her unnoticed. The Marquis's daughter replied that indeed, her life sometimes seemed very strange, as if she were going through some kind of bad luck streak, while others were constantly lucky. The elder looked seriously at his interlocutor and asked how long ago these problems began, to which the girl replied that as soon as she passed from childhood to a more conscious age. The man noted that it was indeed a long period of time, and then began to recall the personalities that had been born into the Leroy family. In this glorious family, talented children often appeared, but not all abilities were useful, applicable, and noticeable, such as a thirst for knowledge, magic, or military craft. Not every descendant of the family could boast of socially useful gifts, such as artists or writers. There were also those whose skills brought only troubles and disappointments. Then Sayos lowered his voice and said that there was a possibility that Leticia should not develop her abilities and awaken completely, because maybe she had already awakened them. The older sister was shocked by such words. She had long since come to terms with the fact that she could not do anything, and then suddenly she learned that she could have a negative gift. The girl could not stand it and jumped up from her seat. She leaned on the table and screamed that she could not bear to live in such conditions, and she must definitely know what abilities she had. The Marquis's daughter did not appear aggressive or angry. Rather, she was upset by the bad news, and therefore hopefully clung to any opportunity to shed light on the dark area of her life. A family friend saw that the first child of the family, Leroy, was driven to despair by the cruel treatment of those around him and did not know how to help in this situation because he only had assumptions. The ongoing dialogue was observed by a maid who secretly eavesdropped on the conversation between Seos and Leticia, hiding behind a large green bush in the garden. True, the girl was unable to overhear the entire conversation. Some phrases were very quiet, but based on individual words, the maid came to the conclusion that the elder sister's gift was to bring misfortune. The conversation between a family friend and the Marquis's daughter on the territory of the Leroy family mansion actually ended in nothing, leaving even more questions. Leticia returned to the house and began to cook food, wondering whether she had any abilities or not, or maybe what she did have shouldn't be brought out for everyone to see. While mixing the dough, the girl thought that if she did possess some kind of dark gift, then it was still a talent that needed to be taken into account and its owner treated with respect. The aristocrat was so immersed in her own thoughts that she did not hear her call. It was Mary. She had been standing at the kitchen threshold for some time and trying to attract the attention of the hostess. Finally, the maid could not stand it any longer and came right up to her mistress, and only then did Leticia notice the maid, who reproachfully remarked that one should not be so absorbed in oneself while preparing food. Then the girls began baking aromatic cookies together in the oven, the smell of which spread far and wide through the corridors of the first floor of the mansion. The sweets were unusual, with fillings, and each product had all the signs of being handmade. The hostess and the maid were having a fun and joyful time in the kitchen, and in the end they had a whole tray, which they were going to send to the hot coals. Literally before our eyes, the dough began to rise and open up so that a delicious and fragrant flower appeared above each mold. The girls were very pleased because if the dough had not risen, the dish would have been ruined, but everything turned out perfectly. Finally, when everything was ready, exquisite sweets were placed on the tray, which were pleasing to the eye and intoxicating with a pleasant aroma. Leticia prepared to cover the dish with a large convex lid called a cloche and said that she wanted to take the delicacy to her loved ones. Walking down the corridor with her creation in her hands, Leticia wondered who she should bring it to first. When she went to Diana, the girl discovered that she had gone out somewhere. Then the older sister decided that in that case, Emile would be the first to taste the still warm treat. Until recently, she and her brother had had a good relationship, and Leticia wanted to support them at all costs. The guy was sitting at the table and, as usual, writing something. He was distracted from the papers and was a little surprised by his sister's appearance. The relative said he didn't expect to see her with a tray on the threshold of his room. The girl revealed the purpose of her visit and reminded him that her brother had once been very fond of such sweets. The young man seemed puzzled and looked not happy but rather confused, and then he replied that he was a bit busy at the moment for a snack. Leticia apologized for distracting her brother from his work and tried to leave his room as quickly as possible. Leaving Emile's chambers, the girl stopped and exhaled, and then began to think about who would be the second owner of the sweet dessert. The noblewoman caught herself thinking that she had expected a completely different reaction from her brother, but she decided not to be upset and continue her journey with cookies for the family. The image of Irene, the younger sister who always loved sweets, immediately appeared in my head, and therefore the choice fell on her. The little girl still had a sweet tooth, so one might expect that her reception would be warmer. As soon as Leticia saw the young heiress, Leroy, walking down the corridor to her room, she immediately called her name. The little girl turned around and asked why her sister had come. The girl looked confused. The little sister's big eyes looked straight ahead, and with some surprise, there was neither joy nor sadness in them. The girl lifted the lid on the tray and said that she had prepared Irene's favorite treat, fruit cookies with figs, and suggested that they try it together. The sister looked at the food, apologized, and replied that she couldn't stand figs and also avoided any cookies in her diet. And when Leticia was surprised, reminding him that she had liked them just recently, the girl suddenly screamed that she hated sweets and did not understand why she had to repeat it. Then the younger sister asked not to bother her with such trifles anymore and quickly ran away. The Marquis's daughter was shocked and only muttered words of apology. She thought that her brother had received her coldly, but it turned out that everything could have been much worse, which was just proven by Irene. Sometime later, the maid who had been eavesdropping on the conversation in the garden found her friend having a snack in the backyard of the mansion. The maid asked the girl what she was eating, and she replied that the young master Emile had treated her to the most delicious cookies. Then the gossips began to discuss the conversation between Mr. Sayos and Mrs. Leticia, namely that the girl's ability had finally awakened, but this gift was a real curse because it brought misfortune. The elder sister was walking in the garden and enjoying the beautiful weather. The sun was shining brightly and the sky was clear and blue, with small white clouds. Suddenly, the girl's attention was drawn to a white dove, which was flying not just like that, but with some specific purpose. Leticia followed the bird and saw a whole flock of birds that were animatedly pecking at some prey. The girl became curious about what had attracted the pigeons' attention, and she came even closer, trying to see their food. The older sister was shocked by what she saw and even opened her mouth wide in amazement. The birds were pecking at the very same sweet-filled cookies that she had lovingly prepared for her family. Meanwhile, the servants were actively spreading gossip about the young mistress's ability to bring trouble, and as confirmation of this, the sudden illness of the maid who ate the cookies for a meal appeared. Naive girls whispered that even being in close proximity to Leticia meant completely losing luck and exposing oneself to great risk. In addition, the maids gave free rein to their imagination and imagined that the Marquis's heiress was a real monster who could curse a person with just one look. The maids agreed that they should avoid any contact with their mistress as much as possible and move away as soon as she approached. The girls then agreed that all work related to Leticia should be transferred to Mary, the servant who was already assigned to the heiress of the family. The culprit of all this gossip did not suspect anything and continued to hover in the clouds of her own memories, thinking about those days when her brothers and sisters loved her. Over and over again, the girl replayed in her head the events of the past days, which seemed like a terrible misunderstanding, but actually happened. Why was Emile so cold and didn't try the baked cookies? For what reason did Irene change her preferences and give up sweets, and do it so rudely and emotionally? There is no need to remember Diana, because she has long since openly demonstrated her dislike for her older sister, and while Leticia's thoughts were somewhere far, far away, her legs walked on their own, obeying some unknown call of the heart. She didn't even remember how she got into the carriage and gave the address. At some point, the girl realized that she was standing on the threshold of an unfamiliar mansion, where she had never been before, although inside the Marquis's daughter already understood that this was the house of Duke Achilles. A young female face appeared in one of the windows on the first floor. It was Liel, looking at her new acquaintance with surprise. The sister turned to her brother and asked what they should do, to which the boy replied that in that case they should go out into the yard and greet the guest. Hearing such advice, the Duke's daughter immediately ran out into the street to joyfully greet Leticia. The dark-haired girl extended her hands to her older friend with such delight that she was a little confused. It was quite unexpected to feel the strong embrace of a sincere person against the backdrop of the hostility in which the heiress Leroy had long lived. The brother tried to calm his younger sister down a little, but she was convinced that the guest had come to play with them and have a good time. And then Leal admitted that she missed Leticia very much. These words touched the girl to the quick, because at home no one had missed her for a long time. On the contrary, they avoided her in every possible way. The older sister smiled and said that she had come to fulfill her promise, because she had given her word that she would come and visit Achilles' family someday. The young mistress of the house replied that it was simply wonderful, and then took the guest by the hand and literally pulled her into the house. Jan noted that his sister should be more careful with visitors to their family nest, but the girl added that he should also quickly follow them so as not to miss anything. Soon the company found itself in a spacious kitchen, equipped with all the necessary equipment. The dishes sparkled with cleanliness and all the items were in their places. Leal seated her guest in a place of honor and said that she only needed to watch carefully as she prepared her masterpiece. Leticia was surprised and asked again if the girl was really going to bake the pie herself, to which Enoch's younger sister replied that she shouldn't worry about it. The Marquis's daughter smiled when she heard Jan ask the girl to calm down, because her older brother had strictly forbidden the children to make a mess in the house, and especially in the kitchen. However, despite the objections, Leal readily set to work, and her brother only threw up his hands, adding that his sister was an extremely stubborn person, with which Leticia immediately agreed. The guy added that if the guest felt the slightest discomfort from this fuss, he could stop everything immediately. She just had to tell him about it. And then the young man added that his sister is, of course, a good and sociable lady, but sometimes she acts too straightforwardly and decisively, which can cause misunderstanding and rejection among people she doesn't know well. Heiress Leroy assured Ian that everything was fine and she felt great, and she was very interested to know how this culinary event would end. Looking at the diligent Leal, the guest added that the only discomfort she felt was due to the fact that she was simply observing and not taking personal part in the process. Leticia watched the process and caught herself thinking that no one had tried so hard for her in a long time, and it was funny and unexpected. Jan noticed that he was very glad about the positive attitude of their guest, because when it all started, the girl had a very confused look. At some point, the young cook called her brother in an uncertain voice and asked him for help, to which he replied that he had managed to prepare in advance, and therefore all the ingredients should be more than enough. After a while, Leticia asked permission to join the process, saying that just watching was very boring. The children protested that they couldn't make their guest strain herself, but the girl assured them that she wasn't going to cook for them, but wanted to do something simple, like prepare apples. The Marquis's daughter completed her task quite quickly and skillfully, as evidenced by the whole bowl of peeled and cut into even slices apples. Meanwhile, Leal finished preparing the dough for the future pie, and Jan carefully watched the process of preparing the sweet dish. At the final stage of the joint culinary performance, the dish was sent to be baked in a hot oven. When the time came, a fragrant and delicious apple pie was placed on the table, which looked amazing. The brother tried to joke with his sister that their guest had done most of the work, but Leal abruptly interrupted him, reminding him that she had made the dough herself, and that was the main part of the dish. Suddenly, the heavy steps of hobnailed boots were heard, and the door to the kitchen quickly swung open. Enoch returned from a business trip and decided to find out what his relatives were doing in the absence of their elders. Leticia looked at the guy, and when their eyes met, she immediately blushed, feeling awkward about this situation. The head of the family was also surprised, but he didn't show it because he was very happy to see the heiress Leroy at home. The young man greeted her politely. He was much taller than his guest, so in his presence the girl sometimes felt very small and defenseless. Enoch smiled broadly and said that he was very glad to see Leticia again, and added that he had often thought of her over the past few days and wondered when she would finally visit their home. Then Achilles added that he was glad of her visit also because he would finally be able to return to her what he should have given her a long time ago, and the girl was very surprised to hear such words, and instead of being cheerful and carefree, the Marquis's daughter turned into a confused and depressed woman. She tried to understand what the owner of the house meant. What did he owe her? But Leticia was even more hurt by the phrase that the guy was glad to see her, because for many years now all the close aristocrats around her had behaved as if they did not want to know their relative at all. The next moment, the heiress Leroy's head began to spin, and she began to lose consciousness, slowly falling to the side, while the children immediately rushed to help, trying to catch the falling guest. Despite this incident, everything ended well and the girl was not hurt. She cut the apple pie into large pieces and served it on the table. Meanwhile, Leal began to beat Jan for doubting her culinary skills and continued to insist that the guest did most of the work, which is why the result was so good. This argument in front of the embarrassed Leticia would have continued for a long time if not for Enoch, who even had to shout at the children to calm them down. Suddenly, the Marquis's daughter had a terrible thought. What if the owner of the house doesn't like apple pies? Because no one had asked his permission to use the kitchen for such purposes. Just recently, heiress Leroy had already prepared a sweet dish, and the result was completely unexpected, despite all her efforts and labors. An image of Irene immediately popped into my head, screaming in the middle of the hallway that she didn't like cookies. Was it all because of the sweets, or was there some other reason for that childish tantrum? Then Leticia held out a tray with a large piece of fragrant pie on a plate and said that it was not at all necessary to eat it if someone did not want to. It was their complete right. Enoch took the dish from the girl's hands and began to examine it carefully, as if he was not going to eat the sweet treat, but to study it. The Marquis's daughter froze in agonizing anticipation. She did not know whether to be happy or sad, because after recent events, she was mentally prepared for any reaction to her culinary creation. The guy smiled and replied that it didn't matter whether he wanted to eat the pie or not, since the work of his loved ones was put into it, so he simply couldn't refuse and had to eat it all. It was a very strange and very ambiguous answer, so the guest decided that she should wait for the reaction after tasting the dish, and began to watch as the host of the house devoured the sweetness. Finally, the girl could not stand it any longer and asked if Enoch liked the treat that she and Leal had prepared in his absence. After chewing the piece thoroughly, the head of the house, Achilles, replied that he had not tasted anything more delicious than this apple pie for a long time. And then the guy asked for more, and this confession became another shock for Leticia on this day, so different from her entire current life at home. Before her eyes, pigeons immediately appeared, pecking at her fig cookies. Apparently her loved ones didn't even try them, but simply threw them away. Bitter tears immediately appeared in the eyes of the heiress Leroy, and she hastily began to apologize for her unexpected reaction. But the girl could no longer restrain herself, and so she covered her face with her hands and began to sob loudly, unsuccessfully trying to suppress the emotional attack. Enoch reacted to Leticia's tears quite calmly and favorably. He stood up from the table and invited the girl to sit next to him and share the meal together. Then the guy touched her face and began to carefully wipe the salty drops off it, saying that he would not be able to continue eating if she cried. Suddenly, the heiress of the Marquis felt irritated because the young man was telling her such words that she had never heard before and did not even think that she would encounter such a good attitude. Suddenly there was a cry of incomprehension. It was Liel and Jan approaching. The girl was trying to find out why their dear guest was standing and crying. Leticia began to apologize to the Duke's son and his family for her moment of weakness, because she did not want to be perceived as an emotionally unstable person and a crybaby. But the teenage girl did not listen to the guest. She immediately, without understanding, attacked her older brother and began to reproach him for the fact that he had brought Lady Leroy to hysterics with some offensive word. The head of the house understood that the situation looked a little strange and tried to explain that he only managed to praise the taste of the apple pie, nothing more, but the younger sister did not listen to him. At this time, Leticia sadly sat down on the sofa and began to justify Enoch, saying that he had nothing to do with it. It was all about her. The Marquis's daughter began to nervously squeeze her hands when Liel asked what terrible thing had happened in her life that had thrown the lady off balance so much. And then the noblewoman decided to tell everything because she did not know what to do and how to get out of this vicious circle of alienation and hostility in which her own family had placed her. Leticia felt that she could no longer contain the pain and suffering that she was filled to the brim with and began to talk about how she was hated and offended at home. Enoch stood with his mouth open, unable to believe that their guest could have such serious problems, and Liel was ready to burst into tears herself from pity for her interlocutor. Then the head of the house, Achilles, dropped to one knee and said that she would always be welcome in this house and would be greeted with the utmost warmth and hospitality. After which the young man closed his eyes and added that he hoped that her visits would become more frequent. Leticia listened and could not believe her ears because no one scolded or reproached her, but only tried to modestly help and soften the burdens of a hard life. Kneeling down, Enoch added that, given the circumstances, he was prepared to prepare something himself for the next visit of the Marquis's heiress, It was very unexpected for the girl to learn that there are people in the world who are ready to do something for her, just to bring joy. The Duke's eldest son smiled and added that he would do everything he could to ensure that his friend would not have to cry anymore. Having thanked for the warm welcome, Leticia said goodbye, got into her carriage, and went home. Jan watched the carriage go and said out loud that he liked it very much and considered their guest a decent person. At first, Enoch did not respond to his younger brother's words. He was thinking about something of his own and pondering the strong feeling that was gradually arising in his broad chest. Then the owner of the house remembered the heiress Leroy, her look, smile, and turn of her head, and then said that he completely agreed with his relative's assessment. And as soon as the guy closed his eyes, he immediately heard her ringing laughter and smiled, as if this was happening in reality and not in memories. While Enoch was daydreaming and replaying the images of the day in his head, Ian suddenly remembered that his older brother was going to return something to Leticia, but the owner of the house replied that it could wait. Once home, Leticia felt completely at peace, because she had finally met people who treated her well and accepted her for who she was. Suddenly her father appeared in front of her, his gaze stern and his brows furrowed. He asked irritably where his eldest daughter had spent the whole day. The girl wanted to answer, but fell silent. She remembered her parents' previous warning and didn't know what to say. Marquis Barrett, seeing his daughter's confusion, became furious. He shouted that she had violated his direct prohibition and continued communicating with Achilles. A family of losers. The head of the clan continued to drive the poor girl into a corner with threats and accusations, pointing out to her her low and pitiful place. Leticia stood in the middle of the corridor, her eyes downcast, and silently listened to the reproaches directed at her. At the end of his furious monologue, Barrett threatened that if his heir even once dared to communicate with this bad family, she might forget the way to this house. After such a cruel threat, the ground literally disappeared from under the girl's feet, and she felt that she was starting to feel unwell. Having said these terrible words, the head of the family turned around and walked away, leaving Leticia alone with her pain, grief, and sorrow. Having recovered a little from what had happened, the older sister went to her room, but when she pulled the door handle, she saw something strange. There was already someone in her room, and the Marquis' heiress immediately recognized her younger sister and the beauty of the family. The girl asked Diana what she was doing in her room, to which her relative looked at her with a cold and piercing gaze. Then the flower mistress turned away and noted that the fact that this room belonged to Leticia did not make it special, which meant that she could freely enter it. After which, the second daughter added that she did not like her older sister's new acquaintances. Moreover, she considered contacts with them to be unnecessary and undesirable. The aristocrat from the Leroy family pretended not to understand what was being discussed, but Diana immediately cut her off and asked her to stop pretending. And then she coldly remarked that a family that has no money, no luck, and no fortune is not only unworthy of communication, but also harmful and potentially dangerous for them. Leticia was extremely outraged by this attitude towards the Achilles family and asked her sister to immediately stop such speeches. But the flower mistress did not calm down. She reported that rumors were already circulating around the city that the heiress of the glorious Leroy family had made the acquaintance of the damned Enoch, the son of the Duke and his relatives. The aristocrat was very surprised by this turn of events and embarrassedly asked her relative to tell her the details. Diana screamed that the descendant of Achilles was simply using a naive girl to raise his family's reputation at her expense. Leticia frowned but did not respond to her sister's serious accusations. She simply did not believe them. However, the beauty did not stop and continued to throw mud at the noblewoman's new friends. Then the first daughter could not stand it and screamed in turn for her relative to stop telling lies. Diana covered her mouth with her hand and asked why she should stop saying what she felt she needed to say. To this, Leticia responded menacingly that the Achilles are much more humane than the Leroys because they do not throw away the food that was carefully prepared for them. The eldest daughter still occasionally had visions of those fig cookies that the family had given to the birds instead of trying them themselves. Upon hearing about the incident, Diana laughed and said that she now understood why she had managed to anger her sister. The flower mistress revealed that she was aware of this story when Leticia prepared the food that Emile and Irene refused, and then added that she herself would not have touched it. Then the aristocrat added gloomily that such dishes cannot be eaten because it is unknown what was mixed into them, and therefore they can be dangerous. The elder sister was genuinely amazed at her sister's audacity and asked her to repeat what she had just said. Diana crossed her arms over her chest and coldly remarked that no one trusted the first daughter in this house, so it was naive to think that the dish she prepared would be received with delight. Then the second sister made a sad expression and said that she even sometimes felt sorry for Leticia, but this feeling of pity quickly went away. After which the mistress of the flower rain once again threatened the girl with problems with her father if she visited the Achilles family even once more. And before finally walking out the door, Diana added that if her older sister dared to disobey her relatives, she would certainly be expelled from the house in disgrace. Left alone, the noblewoman felt that her strength was leaving her. She had not felt so bad for a long time. The girl fell to her knees right in the middle of the room, unable to move due to the moral burden that her father and sister had placed on her. Leticia thought that this cruel and inhuman treatment was like some kind of endless torture, and the punishment was given to her without any guilt. The next few days the older sister spent in bed. She ate practically nothing and almost never left her room. Mary began to worry and began to persuade her mistress to at least get up. The noblewoman responded to all words in the same way. She said that she didn't need anything and she didn't want anything. Not knowing how to distract the young lady from her disturbing thoughts, the maid tried to find a topic that would interest her and mentioned the approaching exams. After these words, Leticia immediately sat down and asked to tell about it in more detail, to which the maid replied that the final series of tests for the title of knight was already very soon. The aristocrat said that she had completely lost track of time because she thought that this event would not happen anytime soon. Then the girl went to the closet and took out from the bottom drawer an item that she had been thinking about for a long time. It was a box containing an exquisite handmade decoration, which Leticia had made herself some time ago, especially for this occasion. A beautiful, thin bracelet rested at the bottom of the box, and when the older sister took the item out, Mary admired this rare and delicate work of pure gold. The aristocrat brought her creation closer to her face and, looking at it carefully, said that according to tradition, such an item should be given to a man who has to overcome difficulties. Mary joyfully exclaimed that this would be a wonderful gift for Leticia's fiancé, but the noblewoman expressed doubts about whether she should do this. The girl then added that she still felt unwell and complained of chest pain, to which the maid suggested that the young mistress spend more time outdoors, at least to see how her favorite flowers were blooming in the garden. Coming out into the corridor, the older sister met Xavier, whom she greeted kindly. The brother, who was famous for his strong spirit and skillful use of a cold blade, saw the girl and immediately became frightened and, instead of greeting her, timidly said that he did not expect to see her here. Leticia asked how he was doing in his studies, since the exam for which the boy had prepared so diligently was coming up soon. The young man raised his hands up, began to back away, and replied that he was too busy right now to talk to her. Suddenly, the Marquis's first daughter saw her brave and courageous brother turn around abruptly and run away, as if it was not his own sister standing in front of him, but a terrible and merciless monster. A passing maid, carrying clean dishes from the kitchen to the dining room, accidentally witnessed this strange scene. Leticia noticed how the maids were exchanging meaningful glances and asked them what was going on here, but the girls did not answer. They only blinked their eyes in fear. The noblewoman looked at what was happening with horror and could not believe that those around her were avoiding her and running away as if from a fire. During breakfast, the Marquis's daughter praised the aromatic tea for its taste and strength, saying that it was quite good, while the maid who prepared it immediately turned pale. The girl serving at the table was clearly not happy that Leticia had paid attention to her. Her face reflected an extreme degree of anxiety and concern. Without looking up from her breakfast, Leticia noticed that Annie, that was the name of the maid, looked strange today and was behaving unusually, to which the maid replied that everything was fine. Suddenly, the Marquis's daughter saw how, under the pretext of an urgent errand that the girl had just remembered, the housekeeper hurried out of the room as quickly as possible. Looking after the running servants, the elder sister thought that something had clearly happened during the days she had spent in bed, because everyone around her was acting strange and was literally afraid to be near her. This was very unusual because Leticia often walked around the family mansion and constantly met workers in the house. On the faces of some, the Marquis's daughter saw pity and anxiety, which they did not even try to hide. The other servants preferred to flee in panic, showing with their whole appearance how scared they were and how much they panicked at the sight of the young mistress. It was all very strange, but no one was going to tell the young aristocrat what was really going on, and the reason for such an attitude from those around her. Thinking that this could not go on for much longer, the first daughter decided to find out at least something and went in search of her family members. The first person from the Leroy family that Leticia met was her younger sister, Irene, who was holding a large rabbit with button eyes. Coming closer to the frightened girl, the eldest daughter asked her if she knew anything about why all the household servants were avoiding and keeping aloof from her. However, instead of answering, the little girl made a scary face and screamed at the top of her lungs so that her sister wouldn't come near her. The aristocrat was surprised that her family reacted in the same way as the servants, because she had hoped to get some answer to this series of mysterious panic attacks in the people around her. True, Irene, unlike the others, remained standing in place, saying that she was very afraid to be near her sister because she was afraid of unknown troubles threatening her. Despite the girl's panic, Leticia tried to question her to find out at least some details and the reasons for this fear. The third daughter replied that the girl's awakened abilities were to blame, namely, the talent to bring trouble and sow misfortune on those around her. These words made the Marquis' heiress feel uneasy, because she could not even imagine how stupid rumors could have become so firmly entrenched in the minds of so many people. Irene was also about to run away, but before that, she said that Leticia herself should avoid any contact, and best of all, never leave her room at all. The noblewoman recalled her recent conversation with Lord Seos, in which she said that her luck level was lower than others, but that did not mean that she brought trouble to those around her. The youngest daughter, without turning around, said that any communication with Leticia only creates a lot of problems, and therefore she herself does not want to participate in this, and leaves. The older sister yelled at the girl that she didn't dare just interrupt their conversation at her own will and leave. Following these words, a young guy appeared in the corridor. He asked what had happened and why those present were making so much noise, distracting him from his important work. Leticia immediately calmed down. She always respected Emil's intelligence and resourcefulness. Perhaps he would be the one to help her figure all this out. Seeing her brother, Irene immediately hid behind him, seeking support and protection, and the young man, noticing this move by his younger sister, took it quite calmly. The noblewoman lowered her head and closed her eyes, and then asked if her relative knew about the rumors that were spreading around that she was to blame for people's troubles and misfortunes as soon as she was nearby. The guy responded with his characteristic restraint and prudence that such information had indeed reached him. The girl pressed her hand to her chest and asked what he thought about this, whether he believed in these legends or had a different opinion. Emil replied that he never took seriously what servants quietly whispered about. Usually, it was made-up nonsense and nothing more, but added that she should not shout at her younger sister. Leticia said that she didn't want to put pressure on the little girl, but she was acting very strange and was the first to start screaming whenever they met. The brother noticed that the girl was very scared, and this should be taken into account when communicating with her. And by communicating in raised tones, the sister would definitely not solve anything, but would only worsen the situation. The noblewoman wanted to answer something, but the words froze in her throat, because in fact this smart guy was saying everything correctly. Irene held her protector's hand and looked with obvious distrust at Leticia, who was no longer as scary, but still caused extreme concern. The Marquis's daughter realized that she had made a mistake because she should not have raised her voice at her sister, because in doing so she only confirmed the bad rumors and ruined her reputation in the eyes of others. The older sister looked closely at the girl and, carefully choosing her words, began to ask for forgiveness for her thoughtless act. Emil turned to the child and hugged her with his arm so that she felt even more protected and could finally calm down. After the apology was made, Leticia wanted to add something else, but she could not formulate her thoughts. Words came with difficulty to her. From the outside, peace, comfort, and harmony reigned in the Marquis' mansion. The lawns were mown, the flowers were fragrant, and the building itself shone with cleanliness and a rich shine. However, within these walls, among the servants, the legend of Leticia's curse grew stronger and wider every day, according to which anyone who was nearby or even caught her eye would get a lot of trouble. Unable to cope with the situation on her own, the girl spent more and more time in her room, not wanting to go out and meet anyone. For days on end, the unfortunate Leroy sat and suffered alone, not understanding for what offense she had been given this new punishment, because bringing trouble was not her ability at all. The aristocrat thought a lot about what she should do, but no bright ideas came to mind, so she continued to suffer. One day there was a knock on the door of her room. The noblewoman rose and answered that the guest could come in. Mr. Seo stood at the threshold. He greeted the girl kindly and asked permission to enter, to which he immediately received consent. The family friend apologized for visiting the Marquis's daughter without warning, but the eldest daughter hadn't been in contact with anyone lately, so she was happy with any visit. Their dialogue took place over a cup of tea, which was soon brought by the maid at the direction of the young mistress. Seo said that he had heard strange rumors about her negative ability, and he had come to inquire how the girl was coping with these difficulties. The first daughter replied that she did not like being in such an atmosphere, but she was coping and trying to live on. Then the guest asked what Leticia herself thought about the legend that had spread. The girl put the cup on the table and asked again what Mr. Seos really wanted to ask, to which the man replied that he was interested in whether the Marquis's daughter herself considered these rumors to be true. Heiress Leroy closed her eyes because she was already tired of making excuses to others, after which Leticia put her hand to her chest and said that she was firmly convinced that she had no evil ability to bring grief and misfortune to people, and all these rumors were complete fiction. The family friend looked closely at the noblewoman, and it seemed to him that she was speaking the truth from the bottom of her heart. The girl looked into Mr. Seos's calm eyes with some hope and counted, if not on help, then at least on psychological support. The guest looked at the girl's clear and bright gaze and sincerely wanted to help her, although he didn't yet know how. The man then took a sip from his cup and added that he also considered the legend of the ability to bring misfortune to be absurd and dangerous nonsense. After which, Mr. Seos closed his eyes and said that, firstly, it was necessary to restore the reputation of the heiress Leroy and dispel the cruel myth, and secondly, to find her true gift. Leticia thanked the family friend for his support, and the man said that he enjoyed being with the girl, but he preferred fresh air and therefore advised her to spend more time outside. When the conversation came to an end, the guest said goodbye, and the noblewoman promised that she would follow his recommendation and would definitely leave her room. The Marquis's daughter was very pleased that in her immediate circle there was a person who not only was not afraid of her, but also tried to help her in every possible way. Leticia folded her arms across her chest and mentally thanked Seos for his intelligence, kindness, and care. Now she felt much lighter and calmer in her soul. Heiress Leroy stood in silence for a while longer, considering her next steps. Then the young noblewoman called her faithful Mary and asked her to prepare clothes for the trip to the city. Driving along the busy streets, the girl looked out of the window of her carriage and was happy about this walk, because she really had been sitting for too long within the four walls of her room, which had become like a dungeon for her. Last time she stopped at the town square, but now she went to a completely different place, where she visited quite rarely. It was the city library, a place where knowledge accumulated by many generations over hundreds of years was kept. Leticia decided that with the help of literature she could find the answer to the question that had been tormenting her for a long time. What kind of ability did she have? The day was already drawing to a close. The girl had looked through a whole stack of all sorts of books, but had not yet made any progress in her search. The Marquis's daughter took the last book for the day and began to study its pages, but even here she could not find anything useful. As she left the library, Leticia thought that she should search as quickly as possible, because if her father found out about these rumors, he could easily kick his useless daughter out of the house. Suddenly, the girl saw a tall silhouette in front of her and looked up. She clearly did not expect to see here the man she had recently met. It was Enoch in his dress uniform. He was just walking past the building and stopped right in front of the steps that the Marquis's daughter was descending. The young people greeted each other joyfully, and the heiress Leroy noted that she had not seen the head of the Achilles clan for a long time, and she was interested in how he was doing. The guy replied that he was fine, and then Leticia asked where his relatives were, with whom he was in the city during their last meeting. Hearing that Liel and Jan stayed at home, the girl immediately became sad. The guy asked what happened and why she was so sad. Enoch looked closely into the clear eyes of his friend and noticed that today she looked somehow tired and anxious. And then the head of the Achilles clan added that the girl could share her sorrow with him to ease her soul. Leticia folded her arms across her chest, wondering what question she should ask. After which the Marquis's daughter looked hopefully at the Duke's son and asked if he knew anything about the Leroy family, about its talents and the inhuman abilities with which its representatives are endowed. Enoch replied that he knew about this family that each of its members had some kind of gift, to which Leticia asked if he knew that she was deprived of abilities. Looking at the girl, the guy replied that there were indeed various rumors circulating around the city, but he did not attach any importance to them, because by trusting rumors one could easily be mistaken. The noblewoman admitted that she was very worried about this, because all of her brothers and sisters had noticeable talents, but she still had not revealed herself, and this was ruining her whole life. Heiress Leroy added that there are many negative legends floating around her, and at first she did not believe them at all, but with each passing day her faith is fading and she is beginning to suspect that this is true. Enoch couldn't find anything to say in response to such words. He looked at his friend and thought about how hard it must be for her to live and how he could help the unfortunate woman in such a situation. Seeing her friend's confusion, Leticia remarked that she still believed that she had some good gift and was determined to find it and show the truth to those around her. The head of the Achilles clan felt sorry for the girl because she was so sweet and friendly, helped others from the bottom of her heart, but inside she was full of pain and suffering. Enoch admitted that he could not boast of much knowledge about her family, but the people believed that the Leroy family name received its gifts from God for sincere prayer. The young man then said that the Almighty could not have endowed members of a godly family with something bad. That would have been strange and illogical. Therefore, the Duke's heir never believed stupid rumors, and he was sorry that such a pure and open person as the Marquis's first daughter suffered because of someone's frivolous gossip. Leticia was very touched by Enoch's words because they strengthened her belief in her own innocence and also gave her the strength to live and fight on, after which the girl threw herself into the boy's arms. During another tea party at Leroy's house, where on the table, in addition to cups, there was a delicious strawberry cake, a small dialogue took place. One of the interlocutors was Diana. She slowly sipped tea and tried to calm her sister, who still could not come to her senses after another meeting with Leticia. The flower mistress placed the cup on the table and said that Irene had nothing to worry about. The second daughter raised her hand and declared that while she was in this house, her family could rest easy because her gift was to bring joy and good luck. But the girl could not relax. She was frightened by the thought that she could just walk around her house and meet her older sister, of whom she was very afraid. Then the little girl asked what their father thought about this, to which Diana replied that he was away and busy negotiating a new serious project and could not be distracted. Then Irene asked again what they should do, but the second daughter interrupted her and again tried to calm her down, and then smiled and returned to drinking tea, taking a cup from the table. The flower mistress closed her eyes and said that Marquis Barrett would take care of this matter when he was free. She promised, but for now the girl just had to listen to her. After thinking for a while, the little girl asked another question that also interested her, namely, what would happen to Leticia after her father found out about her curse? Diana put her cup down on the saucer and replied that she didn't know what decision their father would make, but then she dreamily assumed that the head of the family would either lock the first daughter in the room without the right to leave it, or would show her the door and deprive her of the family's protection. And somewhere in the city, at that very time, on the steps of the library, an innocent girl, surrounded by evil rumors, was quietly crying. The Duke's son leaned over Leticia and decided that Marquis Barrett was a very cruel man, since he allowed people to treat his own child in such a way. Then Enoch reached into his inside pocket and added that he wanted to give her an object that had long been his talisman and amulet, bringing good luck and unprecedented success. The noblewoman became embarrassed and blushed. She said that she did not understand what was being discussed. Suddenly, the girl saw on the palm of the Duke's son the very same handkerchief that she had embroidered for her former fiancé, Levan, and with which she had bandaged the wound on the hand of a random passerby who had become her acquaintance. The day when Leticia came to support her chosen one during the exam immediately came to mind, but he refused to help, and she was happy to give the handmade accessory to someone else. The head of the Achilles family asked the noblewoman with a smile to take care of this object dear to his heart, and the guy really treasured it from the moment of their first meeting. The Marquis's daughter carefully took the handkerchief and said that she would definitely return it to the Duke's son someday, since it was so important to him. Enoch tried to object that it was her handkerchief and he had no claim to it at all, but Leticia was categorical and said that she was now obliged to return it. Clutching her own handicraft in her hands, the girl seemed very happy and joyful. The lady literally glowed with positive emotions that overwhelmed her. The Duke's son was pleased to think that it was precisely his action that was the source of such a sharp change in the girl's mood. So the guy smiled sweetly and agreed to return the scarf, but the noblewoman did not stop there. She said that she felt like a debtor to the Achilles family. Enoch looked at his friend in bewilderment and asked her to explain these words. Then the aristocrat said that she was constantly taking something from him and giving nothing in return. The guy smiled and replied that he knew what to ask Leticia for. Then the Duke's heir said that he would like to see the girl at his test for the title of knight. In his opinion, her presence would serve as the best talisman for good luck for him. The Marquis's daughter replied that she would be very happy to attend this event in order to support the head of the Achilles family. The young man smiled and promised that he would look forward to meeting Leticia again. The aristocrat looked at the guy, and she really liked him, because among all her acquaintances there was no person who treated her as well as he did. Enoch saw the blush that appeared on the face of this sweet girl and thanked fate for the fact that he had the chance to meet her on his life's path. The girl clutched the embroidered handkerchief in her hand and thought about the new feeling that grew stronger every time she and the Duke's son saw each other and talked, but she still didn't understand what it was. When Leticia returned to the mansion, heavy clouds hung over it, and there was no trace left of the previous good weather. Entering through the front door, the heiress Leroy caught her breath, because she had had many impressions and emotions that day, and the mass of books she had looked through in the library also gave her a noticeable fatigue. Then the girl heard the steps of many feet. It turns out that several people had been waiting for her visit all this time. 3 people stood in front of her, Mr. Seos, Irene, and Xavier, looking at the assembled group with an anxious look. Leticia asked what all this meant and why they were meeting her after a trip to the city. The girl was the first to speak up. She pointed her finger at her older sister and said that it was simply outrageous that the damned one was freely walking around the house, to which a family friend asked the child to calm down. The noblewoman took a step towards her brother and repeated her question that she did not understand what had happened and wanted to know why they had gathered here. Seeing his sister approaching, Xavier immediately panicked and shouted at her not to move. The Marquis's daughter looked at her brother with disappointment and said out loud that she was very sorry that false rumors had affected his mind and paralyzed his ability to think clearly. Seos calmly stepped forward and said that his brother and sister should leave him alone with Leticia as soon as possible, but they tried to object to the man. Noticing the resistance, the family friend did something he had never done before. He shouted loudly at the teenagers, which immediately sent them into a state of shock. And when they came to their senses, they immediately tried to quickly leave and literally ran out of the spacious room into the side corridor. Mr. Seos said that things were bad because rumors spread like wildfire, quickly and irresistibly, and therefore there was no one left in the house who was not in the know, after which the man noticed that the situation was getting worse every day, so the girl had to gather all the strength she had to face new difficulties. A family friend put his hand on the girl's shoulder and said that he could no longer cope on his own, and would look for answers in the Tower of Magicians. But while he was there, Leticia should hold on and not give up. The noblewoman thanked Mr. Sayos for his help and support, after which he left the Leroy family mansion and the girl began new adventures. Leticia literally filled her room with all kinds of literature that, in her opinion, could shed light on her real abilities and protect her good name. Reviewing book after book, the Marquis's daughter tried to find at least some clue that would help unravel this complex knot and lead to the solution of her true gift. By reading various literature, the girl hoped to prove to those around her her innocence, usefulness, and goodwill. Finally, the day of the ceremonial passing of the final exams for the title of knight arrived, and the townspeople began to gather in the large arena where a series of duels were to take place. Many participants were wearing commemorative talismans on their hands, golden braided threads. According to a long-standing tradition, girls gave such handmade amulets to their chosen ones to support them during their next test. In addition, wearing such a bracelet was considered honorable because the accessory indicated that someone supported, appreciated, and loved its owner. Leticia also came to the test not empty-handed. She tried to find her ex-fiancé, Levan, in the crowd to give him the bracelet that she herself wove for him. The Marquis's daughter walked around all the halls, but when she finally found the guy, it was too late to give him anything. Diana found him first, and they were talking animatedly about something. Leticia personally saw how her younger sister put her bracelet on her ex-fiancé's hand and wished him luck in the upcoming fights. And Levan stood so happy and contented, it was noticeable how the young people enjoyed each other's company. It was very unpleasant and even painful to watch this scene, but the noblewoman found the strength in herself and restrained her emotional outburst. After all, the heiress Leroy had woven a gold bracelet long ago when they were engaged, and now she was still thinking of giving it for good luck to the one for whom the item was originally created. It was unbearable to look at this picture, and Leticia hastened to move away from disturbing thoughts and her past. Having walked only a few steps, the noblewoman literally ran into a man who was looking for her. It was the eldest son of Duke Achilles. In person, dressed in a ceremonial uniform, he was a little surprised that they almost ran into an aristocrat again. It turns out that the guy had been looking for the Marquis's eldest daughter for so long that he had already lost all hope of seeing her before the battle and decided that she had either forgotten or was unable to arrive at the ceremonial event. Leticia hastened to assure Enoch that she had no intention of missing this important day and had come to fulfill her promise, and suddenly she noticed that he was not wearing a bracelet. The girl didn't even quite understand what happened next, but her hands themselves reached forward and handed the jewelry to the young man. The Duke's son was shocked by this gift because he did not even expect that someone would present him with such a valuable and symbolic souvenir. Leticia held in her open palm a gold bracelet that she had woven with her own hands for good luck during the exam and said that she wanted to give it to Sir Achilles. The young man stood with his mouth open and looked at the accessory. He still could not recover from this unexpected and incredibly pleasant news for him. Finally, the guy came to his senses, took the souvenir, and put it on his hand. It fit him just right, and the girl noticed that her gift suited him very well. The Marquis's daughter folded her arms across her chest and said that she sincerely believed in the power of the bracelet and that it would help its owner win any, even the most difficult duel. The day before this scene, some time ago, Levan stood in the large building where the exams were to be held and waited for Leticia. He hoped that she would still visit him. And when the candidate for knighthood was called out, he turned around with joy, but saw a completely different person. It was Diana, who had fully joined in her father's plan, and was now doing everything to replace her older sister as the young man's bride. The guy was upset because this meant that he would never see his ex-girlfriend before important tests, and she always came to support him, but the last time he pushed her away. Levan did not hide his feelings and directly asked the Marquis's middle daughter where Leticia was, which made the girl somewhat embarrassed. Heiress Leroy made a sad face and immediately lied on the spot, saying that her sister would not be able to come today and therefore sent Diana in her place. The knight candidate thanked the noblewoman for her support and was about to leave, but the girl grabbed his hand and asked him to stay. The Marquis's daughter smiled and said that she could not let the boy go without a gift, and then showed a bracelet made of gold thread. The guy added that she shouldn't have given him such a serious accessory, but the girl gently insisted and began to put it on Levian's hand. The young man was pleased that he was given a souvenir, and he smiled, while the heiress Leroy added that she would take care of the boy instead of her older sister, who was unable to do so. Then Diana smiled and added that she would support the guy in his trials. Suddenly, the girl saw that her chosen one had suddenly become very serious, was not listening to her at all, and was looking in a completely different direction. The Marquis's daughter called out to Levan, but he did not respond or even turn around, but only continued to watch someone attentively. The whole point is that the knight candidate heard a familiar voice, and when he turned around, he really saw the girl he had been waiting for that day since the morning. But Leticia was not alone, and the young man suddenly decided that she had not come to him, but to a completely different person, and now they were chatting nicely together and having a good time. Diana followed the groom's gaze and, to her amazement, saw her sister in the company of Sir Aquilus, with whom she was strictly forbidden any communication. Meanwhile, the young people did not suspect anything and continued to laugh and joke. And following the surprise, the mistress of flowers was overcome by the cruel idea that she could use this knowledge to her advantage and get rid of her rival, the older sister, forever. Suddenly, Leal ran out of the crowd and, running up to her brother, wished him a quick and unconditional victory over all opponents. Ian appeared behind the girl. He looked much calmer, although he was also worried about his brother, seeing his relatives. Enoch laughed and said that they looked as if they were going to take the exam themselves. But the girl could not calm down and said that at least someone in their family should be worried and nervous, because today is a very important day for all Accusations. Suddenly, the relatives saw a gold ornament on the older brother's wrist and were very surprised, but he assured them that they should not pay so much attention to the bracelet. As he left, Enoch called out to his loved ones in a friendly manner and told them not to worry, as he would do his utmost to prevail. When the boy had walked far enough, his face became serious, because he knew that the future of his entire family depended on this exam. Finally, when the time for the competition came, the knight candidates left the hall where they had been socializing with their families and rushed to make their final preparations for the fights. Enoch remembered his conversation with Leticia when he asked her to come on the day of the exam. Now this idea didn't seem so good to him. Perhaps he had gone too far that day, which he now regretted. Yes, the head of Achilles was indeed looking for an opportunity to see this sweet girl again, but when she came to the gala event, Enoch did not even suspect what would follow. The Duke's heir first became suspicious when he saw a gold bracelet in Leticia's hand, and now Enoch looked at this unusual souvenir and thought that luck would accompany him in all his endeavors. The knight candidate lightly squeezed the yellow metal in his palm and felt himself filled with unprecedented strength and self-confidence. The next day, the Leroy family home was still sparkling with cleanliness and order, and the green hedges in front of the mansion gave it a sophisticated and stylish look. Leticia walked and thought about the many strange, inexplicable events happening in her life. Suddenly, the girl was called by a familiar voice, which she did not expect to hear within the walls of her own home. It was Levan, her ex-fiancé, who suddenly arrived and then offered to have tea and chat with him. This was a surprise for the Marquis's daughter, but she immediately agreed and headed to the guest room, following the young man. When cutlery, a hot teapot, and sweet cakes were placed on the table, the young people sat down opposite each other and began to talk. Leticia had interacted with Levan many times at the dinner table, but this time it was different. She felt awkward, constrained, and embarrassed. The ex-fiancé looked intently at the girl and asked if she wanted to tell him something, to which the noblewoman replied that she did not understand what was being discussed. The guy shook his head reproachfully and said that she shouldn't pretend because he knew everything. And then he added that it was not right to send his sister Diana and convey through her that she would not be able to come to the ceremony, while at the same time she was having fun in the company of another gentleman. Levan then added that the engagement was not officially broken yet, and her behavior cast a shadow not only on the Leroy family, but also on his own line of Marquis Elem. The older sister lowered her eyes and blushed. She felt uncomfortable because she felt that she was to blame for what happened, so she did not make excuses and did not even say that Diana lied. The guy reminded her that just recently he had asked her to make an effort to find her gift and spend all her free time on it. But Leticia was barely listening to her interlocutor. She was recalling in great detail her recent meeting with Enoch. Levan noticed that his words did not offend the aristocrat and clenched his fist, on which rested the bracelet given to him by the middle daughter of the Marquis Barrett. Then the young man simply fell silent and continued to watch the girl sitting at the other end of the table. At some point, the guest transferred his irritation from Leticia to Enoch Aquilus and promised himself that when he had the opportunity, he would cruelly punish this man. Levan looked out the window and added that she should put as much effort as possible into finding her gift in order to finally solve the main problem of her whole life. The girl replied that she did not know how to do this. She tried and tried, but it did not work. And if the son of the Marquis of Elam knew a way, let him share it with her. After which, Leticia added with a break in her voice that the guy couldn't even imagine how hard it was for her to live with such a burden and the weight of responsibility for the whole family. Levan replied that he understood her difficult situation, but still believed that she should use every free minute of time to work on herself in search of a gift. The Marquis's daughter literally exploded upon hearing these words and reproached the guy for the fact that he, like many others, only blames her and forces her to take action, while he himself does not want to help at all. To this, the son of the Marquis of Elam noted that she should deal with this issue on her own, and he did not know what exactly she needed to do. Leticia put her hand to her chest and literally screamed that the other person had no idea how much effort she was putting into finding her ability. But the guy did not want to listen and understand what she wanted to tell him, and so the girl, helpless, put her hands on the table. Levan then added that he no longer wanted to continue this conversation because it was very difficult for him to be with the Marquis's first daughter. Leticia realized that the words were meaningless and therefore advised the young man to leave her house immediately, after which the guest stood up and went to the door. The ex-fiancé turned around at the door but couldn't find anything to say, and so he simply left the room, his face reflecting sadness and sorrow. The noblewoman looked long at this man, for whom she had recently felt so many warm and pleasant feelings, but now everything had changed. The older sister felt that under the pressure of circumstances, she was beginning to change, becoming more aggressive and irritable, and she did not like it. After thinking for a while, Leticia decided that the best solution would be a walk in the fresh air, where it would be easier to breathe and more comfortable to think. However, it was not an easy and carefree walk, because Diana came out to meet the girl and she had her own plans. The middle sister looked intently at her relative, and in her gaze one could sense the threat and inevitability of trouble. The aristocrat already understood that her situation would only get worse after this conversation, but she was tired of being afraid, and so she continued to move forward. The mistress of flowers reproached Leticia for walking around the house in an untidy and unkempt appearance, which disgraced not only herself, but their entire family. In the opinion of the second daughter, her sister should immediately return to her home and remain there until her appearance corresponded to the greatness of the Leroy family. The noblewoman bowed her head, ready for a verbal altercation, and said that she did not understand what was being discussed and suggested that the offender express herself more clearly and specifically. Diana reached for the decoration on Leticia's head and tried to tear it off, saying that this cheap and ugly thing should be in the trash can. Then the girl pushed her sister's hand away and demanded that she not touch her. The flower mistress paused for a moment and even retreated, but only to launch a new attack. The older sister raised her voice and again protested against her interlocutor touching her jewelry, but Diana acted aggressively. She quickly reached out, grabbed the ribbon that tied Leticia's hair, and then pulled it sharply towards herself. This act shocked the Marquis's first daughter, because up until that moment she had of course been offended and insulted, but it had never come to violence. The wardrobe item that so outraged the noblewoman appeared in the first daughter's collection for a reason. A few days ago, Mary came to her mistress and gave her a small flat box with a bow, saying that she wanted to somehow thank the lady for her kindness. The maid said that she managed to sell the jewelry that Leticia gave and buy expensive medicine, and now her brother is quickly recovering. The maid tied a bow in her mistress's hair and added that she would like to give her more, but for now she could only give her this modest souvenir, and when Diana tore the decoration from Leticia's head, the ribbon fell onto the slabs of the garden path and remained there. The unfortunate girl tried to bend down to quickly pick up Mary's gift from the ground before it got too dirty. But the next moment, the flower mistress stepped on the edge of the ribbon and added that she did not want to throw the accessory on the ground. It happened by accident, because her sister resisted. Leticia was almost speechless from such impudence, but she immediately came to her senses and demanded that her relative apologize. Diana crossed her arms over her chest and replied that she wouldn't even think about it, because it all happened by accident. Here, the eldest daughter felt the last remnants of patience leave her body. The aristocrat grabbed the flower mistress by the hair and began to torment her, saying that she would not let her go until she apologized to her for her rude behavior. The fight between the sisters ended only when they heard their father's sharp voice ordering them to stop immediately and come to their senses. The girls immediately began vying with each other to tell Marquis Barrett who had started the fight, and they both ended up accusing each other of creating the conflict. The head of the family, Leroy, rudely interrupted their argument and immediately took the side of the middle daughter, blaming Leticia for everything and saying that she had no right to quarrel with her younger sister. The aristocrat was not surprised by this action of her father. She had already become accustomed to the fact that he openly expressed his hostility towards her and did not hesitate to offend her. Then Diana threw herself into her parents' arms and began to cry on his shoulder, and the man began to sympathetically stroke his daughter's head and say that now everything would be fine, because he would be able to protect her. It was very painful for Leticia to watch this picture, but she could do nothing about it, and only felt her insignificance in this family of great and cruel people. Levan suddenly appeared. He approached his ex-fiancée and asked what happened here, but the girl just shook her head and replied that he shouldn't worry about it. But the son of the Marquis of Exile was not satisfied with this answer and intended to find out what had really happened a few minutes ago in this very place. In a breaking voice, the girl repeated that it was absolutely unimportant, and there was no point in talking about it. But the guy insisted. He wanted to know why the sisters fought. Then Leticia gave in and answered that Diana didn't like the ribbon in her hair, and she tore it off her head and then trampled it. The girl continued to clutch the decoration in her hand while Levan thought about what he had heard. Finally, the young man touched his hair and declared that it was very strange and unreasonable to make such a scandal over some ribbon. Leticia asked the guy to explain what exactly he meant. Then the son of the Marquis of Exile added that he was ready to buy her 100 of any ribbons she wanted if she agreed to make peace with her sister and settle this minor disagreement. The girl responded angrily that some things cannot be bought or sold, they can only be earned, and what is important to her is not the ribbon itself, but other people's attitude towards it. Levan looked at his ex-fiancée in surprise and said that he did not understand what she was talking about and repeated that it was not worth starting such a serious conflict over trifles. Leticia noted that for him, this ribbon may be the most ordinary and unremarkable, but for her it is an expensive and valuable thing that cannot be treated like that. The noblewoman lowered her voice, raised her hand with the ribbon up, and put the other to her chest and said that this was an important gift that she treasured very much, which is why she was reacting so emotionally. But the young man did not hear her. He only repeated that he could give her many, many different ribbons just to settle the conflict. Then the heiress Leroy asked if he really thought he could give her a ribbon that she would like more than this one. Levan couldn't find anything to say in response, but only looked with regret at the girl he wanted to help, but didn't understand how to do it. Realizing that she would not be able to find understanding from this man, Leticia said that she did not need anything from him, turned around and walked away. Meanwhile, evening had come. The sun had set behind the horizon, gradually enveloping the Leroy family mansion in twilight. The ex-groom stood in the middle of the luxurious garden and reproached himself for not being able to talk normally with his bride because their status had not yet been officially determined. And while the guy was tensely thinking about what he had done wrong and how he could get out of this situation, he was called out. It was Marquis Barrett, who approached the young man and asked if he planned to leave right away or if he wanted to stay a little longer to talk. Elam's son replied that the day was drawing to a close, so he intended to go home as soon as possible. Before finally leaving the Leroy estate, Levan thought that it was strange. Why did the head of the family want to talk to him if he initiated the dissolution of the engagement? And while the carriage quickly carried the young aristocrat home, he kept thinking about what these incomprehensible events that were constantly happening around him could mean. The young man did not look out the carriage window at all, but concentrated on the thought that his bride, who had already begun to behave like an ex-girlfriend, should open the gift as soon as possible in order to save their union. Suddenly, Levan remembered a long-forgotten picture from the past, when he could not awaken his own talent, and then Leticia came up and offered to try one remedy. The guy did everything as the girl advised him, and literally immediately not only felt the power unfold, but even saw how his blade began to glow with a cold radiance. This memory made the son of Marquis think hard, because it turns out that the heiress of Leroy was able to easily awaken his own talent. Meanwhile, Diana tried unsuccessfully to fix her damaged hairstyle, and was very angry that she could not restore her previous harmonious appearance. The flower mistress became more and more irritated with each passing minute and blamed her older sister for everything, calling her bad words. But what most outraged the second daughter was the fact that this scene took place in front of her future groom, the son of the Marquis of Elem, and he approached Leticia, not her. A new day had dawned at the Leroy estate, and the house servants were going about their usual work. Mary stood behind her older sister and cried because of what had happened to her mistress's face and hands. There was literally no living place on them. The heiress of the family tried to tell about what happened in detail, but immediately realized that then she would have to tell the servant the truth, that Diana did not like her gift, and she did not want to do this. The maid looked so frightened and upset that Leticia did not dare to tell her what had happened to her ribbon and only said that she should not worry about it. Mary approached her mistress and hugged her by the shoulders and then promised that she would always be there in difficult times and that the noblewoman could rely on her at any moment. The maid then added that she, of course, had no title and was born into a simple family, but she was always ready to hug, hold her hand, and morally encourage her mistress. After these words, Leticia felt much better, and she even agreed to go to the garden to drink tea there on the territory of the gazebo. The other maids who saw the older sister leave the house were very unhappy that the heiress Leroy allowed herself to leave her room. They were panicky, afraid even of her gaze. Diana was walking by. She heard the servants' conversation and assured the girls that very soon they would not have to worry about this, because she would personally sort this issue out once and for all. Then the second daughter stopped and listened with pleasure to a stream of flattery and pleasant words from the house servants, who were glad to quickly get rid of the damned one, and showered the lady with a mass of compliments. After this, the heiress Leroy went to her father's office, as he had recently returned from a long trip and could now take care of the business without leaving home. Barrett asked how his beloved daughter was feeling, to which Diana replied that she was gradually recovering from the terrible events of the previous day. The cunning sister made a pitiful expression and said that now she would have to take medication to fully recover, and then added that she had important information. The head of the family expressed concern about his daughter's health, and then added that he was currently free from work and could devote as much time to her as necessary. Then he noticed Diana's bandaged arm and asked what had happened, since there had been no noticeable wounds there just yesterday. The girl quickly put her hands behind her back, but her father demanded an explanation, because no one dares to encroach on his beloved daughter. And then the flower mistress began to speak. She had been preparing this speech for more than one day and expected to receive certain consequences as a result of this conversation. White daisies bloomed in the garden and did not even suspect what passions were happening somewhere very close to them. Butterflies fluttered carefree from flower to flower and delighted the eye with their intricate patterns on their wings. Leticia walked into the very middle of the meadow of her favorite flowers and enjoyed the fragrance of nature, the singing of birds and the rustling of green leaves. Having thus received a charge of positive emotions from nature, the heiress of the Marquis returned to the house. Now she felt much better and was full of strength and energy. Suddenly, her father appeared in her path. It was so sudden that the girl immediately froze in fear. The man's face was very serious, and his gaze expressed anger and fury. Naturally, this meeting was not accidental, and therefore did not bode well for the poor girl. Diana stood next to him. She had long blamed her sister for all possible misfortunes. Then Barrett asked how Leticia, having the ability to bring trouble, dared to leave her room. When the first daughter tried to defend herself and object, the Marquis reminded her that she had also disobeyed his order and continued communicating with the Achilles family. And then the man raised his voice and said that her behavior was simply outrageous and unacceptable, after which Chief Leroy pointed to the second sister's bandaged wrist and said that this was confirmation of the curse that Leticia had brought upon their family with her actions. The cunning mistress of flowers smiled lightly and rubbed her bandages, as before her eyes the insidious plan she had created was being fully realized. The Marquis continued to put pressure on and blame his own daughter for misfortunes, troubles, and any problems, and then added that if things continued like this, the girl would completely destroy their family. Barrett ended his disparaging monologue by announcing his decision to strip his first daughter of her status as a member of the Leroy family. The unfortunate noblewoman looked in horror at her father, who had just abandoned her. She had no idea that such a nightmare could happen to her. The Marquis added that from now on she no longer has any connection to their family, thus he hopes to save their ancient family name from its curse. Leticia tried to talk to her father, but he didn't even want to listen to her, and silently turned around and walked away. The rootless aristocrat stood in the middle of the corridor and watched her former relatives, who had treated her so cruelly and inhumanely, slowly walk away. After some time, Irene went to see Diana to find out about her health. Everyone was worried about an unknown injury on the second daughter's hand. However, the flower mistress assured her younger sister that she was completely fine, and immediately unwound the strips of white cloth, showing that her hand was completely healthy and there were no wounds there. The rogue smiled and added that there was no damage there at all, and the bandages were just an important part of the performance that she masterfully played out in front of her father. To finally turn the parent against his first daughter, the aristocrat told him that she had hit her hand after Leticia had wished her to suffer and feel pain. Diana showed Barrett her bandaged hand and added that her sister was not there at that moment, but after this evil wish, she soon tripped and got injured. Then the flower mistress made a pitiful expression and added that this could of course be an accident, but she understood that her father would take this information unambiguously. For a while, the insidious girl was silent, considering the possible consequences of Leticia's expulsion. And then she added that she was proud of her plan, because thanks to it, their family finally got rid of such a walking misfortune as their first daughter. After which the girl laughed loudly with joy that her plan had worked out so well. Meanwhile, a painting suddenly fell from the wall in the Marquis's office and fell to the floor, with the frame and glass shattering into pieces. Marquis Barrett was very surprised, because he had abandoned his daughter. So why did her curse continue to work after she lost her status as Leroy's heir? At this time, Leticia was walking quickly along a forest path. She ran away from home immediately after the humiliation that her relatives had inflicted on her. The hair on the desperate girl's head was disheveled, but she did not pay attention to it, because in her chest there was only one thought: to leave the possessions of another family as soon as possible. At some point, the unfortunate woman caught on a lying branch, tripped, and fell. She felt the strength leaving her body, unable to resist the circumstances. Leticia took only one item from home with her, an embroidered handkerchief that she had made with her own hands. She had nothing else. Then the former heiress of the Marquis remembered Sir Enoch, who called this accessory his talisman, bringing good luck and success. The guy spoke quite sincerely when he gave the handcrafted item back to its creator. During their last meeting, the Duke's son asked them to take care of the handkerchief because it was important and dear to him. This piece of fabric, decorated with a green pattern, may have looked like an ordinary rag, but one person put his time and effort into it, and another, emotions and hopes. Leticia looked at the accessory and tears appeared in her eyes, and a heavy lump rose in her throat. And then the girl knelt down, pressed the talisman to her chest, and began to pray to God, asking him for protection, patronage, and wise advice because she did not know at all what to do next. As a response, literally a few seconds later, streams of pouring rain fell from the sky onto the girl's head because the Almighty often speaks to us in the language of life's circumstances. Leticia felt a little embarrassed. She felt very cold, and she never expected to receive such a quick and such a strange answer to her request. Her first thought was to get up and immediately start looking for any shelter, but despondency gripped her body, and for some time the girl continued to kneel in the pouring rain. Then the former daughter of the Marquis completely gave up, because she didn't even know where she should go in such a situation. Suddenly, heavy footsteps were heard from somewhere. Apparently, a man was confidently walking along a forest path. Suddenly, a familiar voice called Leticia by name. The homeless daughter turned around and froze in amazement, because she clearly did not expect to see him here. It was the head of the Achilles clan in person. The guy had an umbrella in his hand, and his face expressed genuine concern. Soon, a full moon appeared in the sky, and the rain began to subside little by little, and the clouds began to disperse. Enoch decided that the girl had fallen and asked her to get up immediately, but then he saw that she was soaking wet. The young man took her cold little hand with his warm big palm and helped her rise from the damp ground. Then the young man began to ask the girl about what had happened, but she said that everything was fine, although her face was wet not only from the rain, but also from bitter and salty tears. The guy added that it was impossible to walk down the street at such a late hour and in such weather, and then offered to walk her home to the Leroy family mansion. Leticia replied that she was grateful to Enoch for his help, but she could not return there because it was now a foreign home and a foreign name to her, after which the rootless aristocrat told her friend that her father had abandoned her and thrown her out of the family estate, and now she had nowhere to go and did not know what to do next. The girl lowered her eyes and thought that now she would surely lose her last friend, because she was a nobody, and why would the Duke's son communicate with a man deprived of his noble title? Enoch looked at the Marquis's former daughter with a long and attentive gaze. He understood that such a blow was really hard to bear. After this, Enoch invited Leticia to go to his home, to the Achilles family mansion, where she was always welcome. The girl could not believe this joy, and so she asked again if the guy was really inviting her to his place, to which Enoch replied that he did not know a better place where she could dry out and warm up. But the lowly noblewoman repeated the question, for it seemed incredible to her that the aristocrat's opinion of her had not worsened after he learned that she had lost her status. The Duke's son laughed and assured Leticia that not only he would be glad to see her, but also his brother Jan and sister Leal, for they had become so attached to her during the rare meetings they had. When they arrived at Achilles' estate, the gates were welcomingly open, and the girl thought that now her whole life depended on one noble and honest man. The rain had picked up again and was now pouring down in buckets, but it didn't matter, because the former daughter of the Marquis was now in a warm and dry room under the protection of good Sir Enoch. The Duke's son escorted the lowly noblewoman to her new room and told her that she could make herself comfortable there. The girl thanked her savior and said that she did not know how she could repay the Achilles family for their kindness. The guy replied that good people need help, especially if they are in trouble, and added that Leticia could not just spend the night there, but stay for an indefinite period. The former Leroy noted that if she stayed, she would become a burden to the hospitable people, but Enoch politely asked the girl to calm down and focus on drying off and resting. Before leaving, the young man smiled affably and wished his guest good night and peaceful dreams. Leticia blushed and also wished her savior good night, and then thought how lucky she was to have met this incredibly compassionate man on her path. But then, a deep sadness came over the face of the lowly noblewoman, because she began to think that she would create trouble and an additional burden for the poor family of Achilles. After all, they know her so little, but they surrounded her with love and care, like a close and dear person. How can Leroy's ex repay them? And if earlier Leticia was burdened with the hostility and cruelty of her own family, now she was burdened with the burden of an unpaid debt in which she found herself, having become a guest in a new house. The next day, a meeting of the heads of the Leroy and LM families took place at the Marquis' mansion, where Levan learned that his ex-fiancée had been struck off the family list and left the estate. The former father of the first daughter coldly noted that he had no other choice, but the guy began to insist that it was impossible to do this and asked where the girl was now. And when the young man heard that Barrett had no idea where Leticia had gone, he shouted at the man, which caused a negative reaction from the head of the family. Levan eventually threw open the door and hurriedly left the family gathering, going in search of his former fiancée, who had been stripped of her status. Marquis calmly commented on his son's actions, adding that over these many years, the boy and the girl have become very close and have become like a real family, which is why the boy is so worried. Barrett scratched his forehead and said that children rarely listen to their parents, so he understands everything and accepts the situation as it is. Levan still couldn't believe what had happened, because now he could forget about marriage with Leticia forever. But what outraged him most was the attitude of her own father, who had abandoned his daughter. Over and over again, the guy replayed in his head their last conversation, when the sisters fought over a hair accessory, and then she clearly tried to explain something to him. The young man did not fully understand what exactly the former noblewoman wanted to convey to him, but he saw that the subject of the dispute was of considerable value to her. Levan didn't know how hard it was for Leticia in her home, but he wasn't stupid or blind, so he began to suspect something. And the guy also felt that he was already starting to miss her, because now they definitely wouldn't be able to spend time together like before, and he had planned to see her again, because he had promised to buy her the tape. And then he remembered again that Marquis Barrett had crossed his daughter out of the family tree, and this thought made his fist clench, because it was a very cruel punishment, and yet she had done nothing wrong. Before the head of the Elam family left the Leroy mansion, he agreed with Barrett that he would talk to his son about replacing Leticia with Diana in their marriage. Then the Marquis himself went to the city on business. He rode in a carriage and thought that now that he had finally gotten rid of his useless daughter, things would definitely go uphill. Suddenly there was a crunch and a terrible crack. The crew was thrown up and tilted to the side, after which they stopped. Barrett leaned out of the window and asked the coachman what had happened, to which the man replied that the wheel had broken, and therefore they would have to be a little delayed on the road. The Marquis was very surprised, because this had never happened before, and the carriage was regularly inspected, and funds were allocated for timely repairs and adjustments. The next morning the clouds had completely cleared, and it was a fine, sunny day. Liel and Leticia walked among the strawberry bushes and collected the ripe and abundant harvest. The heiress Achilles taught her new friend how to properly pick the berries so as not to crush them. Enoch and Ian, meanwhile, discussed the condition of their guest and agreed that she was feeling much better, while the younger brother was interested in the reasons for what had happened. The older relative replied that due to personal enmity, the girl was excluded from the list of members of the Leroy family, and thus made into an almost rootless commoner. The guy thought about it a lot. He remembered how during the meeting at the library, Leticia told him that her relatives reproached her for her lack of abilities. But could you really kick someone out of the house for that? Enoch then asked that Jan not tell their guest that he knew the reason for her appearance in their house, so as not to embarrass the unfortunate girl once again. Meanwhile, the lowly noblewoman continued to pick strawberries and think about how she could repay her debt to the Achilles family, since they had taken her in despite everything. The only thing that has come to the mind of the former daughter of the Marquis so far is to provide maximum assistance around the house and be an extremely useful person around the house. After harvesting, the girl went to the kitchen and made delicious cookies, and then decided that she would do other work. Having found a broom in the closet, Leticia began to restore order and cleanliness in all the rooms of the mansion. Then, after the dry cleaning, the wet and homeless aristocrat thoroughly washed the floors in the huge house, which was not at all easy. Finally, the former daughter of the Marquis Leroy wiped the dust off all surfaces and objects until they sparkled, so that Achilles' estate was literally transformed in the space of one day. While cleaning, the young worker paid special attention to hard-to-reach places, under chairs, tables, and other objects that usually interfere with sweeping and washing the floor. So when Enoch returned home, he was somewhat taken aback by how clean and tidy his home had become. The young man just happened to catch the girl during the final cleaning of one of the doors and, in surprise, addressed her by name. The Duke's son remarked that she did not need to exert herself so much with physical exertion, but the girl sadly replied that she could not do otherwise because she felt obliged. Enoch asked how she felt in her new place because he was worried about her mental state, and then the owner of the house added that he invited her to his place so that Leticia could rest and regain her strength, and not at all so that she would exhaust herself with simple physical labor. Continuing to clutch the dust rag, the girl admitted that she was fine, but she felt uneasy because she was burdened by her debt to the Achilles family for sheltering her. Enoch was very surprised to hear that his noble act had caused the unfortunate girl so much moral distress, because her family had simply abandoned her. The lowly noblewoman admitted that it is very difficult for her to accept kindness and sincere help, because she immediately begins to feel that she is obliged to repay for it. The young man looked sadly at the unfortunate girl and thought about how she had been bullied in her home, how they had damaged the girl's psyche so much that she now behaved like this. After listening to the former heiress, Leroy, Enoch replied that the best gratitude for him would be her new outlook on life, where there would be no place for fears and reproaches of household members. Leticia looked at her savior with hope, and he added that he would never, under any circumstances, dare to kick her out of this house so she could live here in peace. The owner then added that he did not like the idea of establishing any debt relationship between them, as he considered it a bad basis for friendship. The girl agreed, but asked to clarify what exactly Enoch meant, and then the guy noted that she should not be cleaning, washing floors, or even caring for flowers. Leticia replied that she understood what the Duke's son was talking about, but what then, in his opinion, should she do? And then she added sheepishly that she really loved flowers and would like to get permission to at least water them sometimes. The young man smiled and replied that in that case their garden would be at her disposal, and his order banning housework would not apply to the plants. Then Leticia raised the rag to her face again and asked to be left with the right to clean her own room, including the usual cleaning. Enoch looked at his guest for a while and thought, how could such a hard-working, modest, and decent girl be excluded from a noble family? Then the owner of the house agreed to this request as well, but noted that he still wanted to get something from her. The Duke's son announced that Leticia should have a good rest and feel not just like a guest in someone else's house, but experience maximum comfort so that this mansion would become her home. The former heiress, Leroy, could not believe her ears because just recently she lived in an atmosphere of hostility, hatred, and dislike, but now her fate had changed dramatically. The girl finally smiled. The thought gradually began to dawn on her that everything was going well, and she began to thank her savior for his kindness and care. Leticia laughed and said that she hadn't really felt so light and calm in a long time because she was surrounded by friends who accepted her as she was. Enoch was touched by these pleasant words and thought that he had done the right thing when he decided to accommodate the guest in his house. The guy then went about his business, remembering that his younger sister was going to start baking a pie again, which meant that the guest could join the girl to help her. However, they did not have time to reach the kitchen because right in the main hall, at the entrance doors, they witnessed an unusual scene where Jan and Liel were reading some letter. Judging by the patterns on the edges of the sheet of paper that the sister was holding in her hands, it was not just any paper, but some important document with very serious content. Finally, Leticia couldn't stand it any longer and asked what was so unusual that their faces changed so much as a result of reading it. Instead of answering, the young heiress Achilles handed over the letter and offered to look through its contents herself. The paper was indeed expensive, with intricate patterns, but most importantly, it said that Enoch had successfully passed the final exam and became a Knight of the Royal Order. Liel immediately threw herself on her brother's neck and began to joyfully hug him and congratulate him on this incredibly important event for their entire family. Then Leticia came up and took the Duke's son by the hand. She understood that all this time the guy was waiting for the results of those tests before which she gave him a gold bracelet. And now they came. The girl laughed and said that from that moment on, she could rightfully call the young man not just Sir Achilles, but Knight Achilles. The owner of the house was still somewhat nervous because he had hoped for success so many times that, having received what he wanted, he was not ready to simply accept his new status. Finally, Enoch came to his senses, thanked the guest as well as his brother and sister for the compliments, and said that this was truly a serious event in the life of their small family. After some time, Liel heard the sound of a carriage approaching and went to the window to find out who intended to visit their house. And indeed, an unfamiliar carriage stopped opposite the central entrance. Young Mrs. Achilles went outside to greet the guest and was surprised as she had never seen this man before. He was a young, physically strong guy, tall and with a confident gait. Leal escorted the young man into the house and took him straight to her older brother, who looked in surprise at the nobleman whom he knew a little but did not expect to see in his house. The son of the Marquis of Elem walked slowly up to the owner of the house and introduced himself, then asked to see Leticia to talk. After some time, the former heiress Leroy entered the office. She was surprised to see her former fiancé, but did not resist the opportunity to talk to him, and sat down in the chair opposite. Having made sure that the guests needed nothing, Enoch said that he would leave them alone so that they could speak as freely as possible. At first, the former bride and groom looked at each other silently and did not dare to start a dialogue, thinking about what they could say in such a situation. Finally, Levan asked why the former heiress of the Marquis did not tell him what had happened to her, and did not tell him where she had gone from home, since he had spent so much time looking for her. Leticia asked him why he had come here. Was it really only to reproach her for not informing him of her new status as a lowly aristocrat? The young man suggested that the lady return to discuss what had happened in another area where she would be more comfortable. The former heiress Leroy asked where she should return to, but Levan did not understand the question and asked again what she meant. Leticia closed her eyes and noticed that there were no more places in the world where she could go and stay. The guy replied that he would be glad to see her at his estate of Marquis Elem and asked with surprise if she was really thinking about staying here in the Achilles mansion. For a while, Leticia hesitated over the answer. She remembered her whole past life and the long years spent together with Levan because they were supposed to become husband and wife, and they were waiting for this. But then the former heiress Leroy remembered the coldness with which her failed fiancé perceived her pain and suffering, and so she made a final decision and announced that she intended to stay. The young man was very surprised by this choice because it seemed to him that he was the only one in the world who was ready to accept his former chosen one, deprived of her noble title and surname. Levan tried to put pressure on the girl, reminding her that he was her fiancé, but she immediately rejected all his attempts to control her behavior, saying that now she decides for herself where and with whom she will live. Faced with such strong resistance, the young man became upset and said that in that case he could no longer help her and was going to leave the house. Meanwhile, the Achilles family watched this unexpected conversation from a respectful distance. They did not hear what the guy was talking about with the girl, but they understood that he wanted to take her with him. Enoch told his family that Leticia and Levan had been officially engaged for many years, but after being expelled from the family and deprived of their last name, this union had very little chance of success. Jan asked his elder brother what they should do if this aristocrat wanted to take the girl away with him, to which the owner of the house did not know what to answer. The Marquis's son left the office in proud solitude, and then he headed towards the exit of the mansion. Halfway along the way, they met Enoch and came very close to each other, at arm's length. The owner of the house looked intently and confidently. He saw that the guy Leticia was supposed to marry was leaving alone, which meant that she had decided to stay. Levan also examined his rival. He thought that his bride, although a former one, in a difficult moment preferred to take refuge in the estate of Achilles, and did not turn to the son of the Marquis for help. For a while, the boys looked at each other in silence, and then simply went their separate ways. Leal looked after the departing guest and shook her fist. She was outraged that the Marquis's son did not say goodbye, did not apologize for the sudden visit, and in general, behaved outrageously. Soon Leticia came out of the house and asked for forgiveness for her ex-fiancé and his indecent behavior, to which Enoch's sister immediately replied that she had nothing to apologize for. The guest wanted to say something else, but she felt awkward and, embarrassed, she fell silent. Suddenly, Jan approached Leal and literally dragged his sister away to pick strawberries. He wanted to give the elders the opportunity to discuss the current situation in private. After the children left, Enoch invited Leticia to return to the house to talk about what had happened. The Marquis's former daughter was a little upset and asked permission to say something right there on the street in front of the mansion. The owner of the house stopped and replied that he was always ready to listen to her, so she could freely express her thoughts wherever she wanted. The noblewoman said that she really wanted to stay here for some time, since after she refused Levan, she really no longer had any place where she could hide. The girl then added that she understood how many problems she was causing the Achilles family, but she had nowhere to go and asked not to be kicked out of this hospitable home. Enoch was extremely surprised by such a request because it seemed to him that they had settled this issue yesterday, and suddenly the dialogue returned to the very beginning. The guy covered his face with his hand and replied that his concern was caused by the fact that he was afraid that Levan would take their guest away with him, but he sincerely wanted her to stay with them. Leticia smiled and promised that the owner of the house could be completely calm about this because she had firmly decided to stay with the Achilles family. After these words, Enoch immediately became cheerful and suggested that the girl consider this house her home, because in this way the girl removed all his fears about his future fate. Then the former Leroy smiled and added that, apparently her stay in the mansion would last much longer than she had originally planned. The owner of the house noted that it did not matter at all because they had a spacious house with plenty of space. Leticia suddenly felt embarrassed. She suddenly realized that she had never in her life met such a kind and generous person as Enoch. However, the Marquis's former daughter still decided to add that she plans to stay here for a really long time. Enoch smiled and replied that this was wonderful news that not only brought joy to his heart, but would also please his younger sister and brother. However, this did not calm the girl down, but on the contrary, led to an emotional breakdown, and she literally screamed that she might spend the rest of her life in this house. Leticia suddenly realized that she had said it in vain, and then began to quickly apologize and try to take her words back in a panic. The owner of the house was not at all embarrassed. On the contrary, he laughed and noted that he could not be frightened by such words. But the girl immediately turned pale and replied that she had meant something completely different. Then the knight added cheerfully that he did not expect to hear such words, and therefore he should think about it carefully. The aristocrat felt uneasy because she thought that the duke's son might change his mind and throw her out of the house after such a confession. However, judging by the young man's face, this situation only amused him, and he asked if the lady wanted to tell him anything else. The girl's face flushed, and she replied that she had nothing more to add, and began to reproach herself for having said too much that should not have been said. Then Leticia added that she had urgent business to attend to and hurried away from the smiling Enoch. But, approaching the front door, the former Leroy suddenly realized that she couldn't open it. She immediately thought that the owner of the house had locked the door and wasn't going to let her in. The lady felt sick and began to emotionally tug at the handle. She began to think that this was all a bad joke, and perhaps even a bad dream. The duke's son came up from behind and gently placed his large, warm hand on the girl's hand, and then said that it was all about the door lock. The knight noticed that the lock could only be opened if the door handle was turned in the right direction. Otherwise, there was no way to enter the house. Leticia felt bad because she looked stupid when she tried to open the door the wrong way. The noblewoman did not know what to do or how to act in such a situation. She was ready to sink into the ground from shame. Finally, the girl went inside and immediately saw Liel and Jan. They said that they were very worried about their guest and were afraid that she would leave with Levan. The girl was very happy when she found out that Leticia was staying, and then suggested that they go back to the city, to the market square, to have some fun. After some time, the group of young people again found themselves in the very place where they had once met for the first time. Liel handed her friend a coin and suggested that they try their luck, just like they did the first time. The former daughter of the Marquis sadly replied that she was afraid of losing, but Liel continued to insist, saying that she had to overcome her fear and just try. Finally, Leticia agreed and paid the owner of the attraction, then received a projectile to throw at the target, after which she prepared to throw. The dart flew in the right direction, but it hit quite far from the center of the circle. The aristocrat was very upset and began to say that she was sure of her failure, to which Liel replied with a smile that it was a good result because she got so close to the goal. Leticia said that she would really like to help her new family by winning a sack of flour for them, but she just wasted the money. The dark-haired friend was very surprised by such a desire because they came here to have fun and not to get supplies for the kitchen. The noblewoman replied that she remembered the sincere delight on the children's faces when they won last time, and she really wanted to repeat it. Jan and Liel looked at each other in surprise. They clearly did not expect such a turn of events. And then the children laughed merrily because they came here to fool around and get a boost of good mood. But Leticia was in no mood for laughter. She stood there, sad and pale, trying to understand whether her friends were laughing at her or at the situation she had found herself in. Jan was the first to come to his senses. He replied that a bag of flour is, of course, a useful thing to have in the house, but their family is not starving, so for them it is more of an entertainment than a way to eat. The girl was clearly puzzled. She thought that food was more important to the Achilles than it actually was. Then the guys went in search of new adventures, with Leal leading the group and trying to find something fun and exciting around them. Leticia walked last and thought that they had come to have fun, but for some reason she felt very sad and melancholy. Suddenly, Leroy's ex saw a young guy in the crowd. He seemed very familiar to her, even from behind, and the young man was like two peas in a pod with Emil, her ex-brother. The head of the Achilles family did not go with the company, despite the fact that the weather outside was beautiful, but stayed in the mansion to take care of some family matters. The knight began to work with the documents and began to read a letter in which a manager named Graham asked the owner's opinion about the possible closure of the operating mine. The young man remembered how his father once brought him straight to the mine where prospectors were mining pink diamonds. The Duke promised little Enoch that one day this mine would make their family incredibly rich, but they would have to be patient and invest a serious amount of money into the development. However, instead of profit, the development brought only losses, since the pink diamonds turned out to be not pure, but with a large number of inclusions of other substances. That is, everything was in vain. Many years have passed since then. Workers have extracted a huge volume of rock from underground, but have not found any new minerals, so Enoch seriously considered selling this business. Suddenly, the owner of the estate heard the characteristic noise of wheels, which meant that guests would soon appear in the house. The Duke's son's hearing did not fail him. It was indeed a carriage that was quickly approaching the building. The crew stopped right in front of a tall, long staircase covered with a red carpet. A recent acquaintance, whom Enoch had seen in the morning, came out of the carriage. It was Levan. There was some tension between the guys, because one of them was once engaged to Leticia, and the other took the girl in at his family estate. The Marquis's son looked intently at his rival, but remained silent. The knight calmly withstood the guest's gaze, and calmly replied that if he had come to see his former fiancée, then she was not at home now. To which Levan noted that this time he had come for a completely different reason, and that he had an important matter concerning the head of the Achilles family personally. Enoch nodded affirmatively and suggested following him to a room more convenient for dialogue to discuss the details of this unexpected visit. Walking along the corridors of the mansion, the Marquis's son carefully examined the furnishings. He noticed that all the objects and decorations were quite old and had long since gone out of fashion. Many of the interior details seemed extremely cheap and tasteless to the heir of Elam, so he wondered why Leticia chose such a poor and miserable family. Following the owner of the house, Levan tried to understand the reason why his chosen one had exchanged a life of luxury with him for this strange place, where maybe there was no normal food. While exploring the new home of the former heiress Leroy, the guy also made an unexpected observation that there were absolutely no servants in the house, which meant that this family was really very poor. Eventually, the young people came to a spacious guest room where Enoch personally made tea and poured it into cups. Then they began to talk. Levan began by noting how much influence the owner of the house had on his former chosen one, so he wanted to ask him for a favor. And when the knight asked what he could do for the Marquis's son, he heard the answer that he had to explain to Leticia one simple thing. She had no place in this house. The guy then clenched his fist tightly and added that he couldn't allow his ex-fiancée to live in such terrible conditions, so she had to leave Achilles' mansion immediately. Enoch closed his eyes tiredly and replied that Levan simply did not understand what he was talking about. And when the guest asked again, he received the answer that he should discuss this issue directly with Leticia and not try to resolve it through intermediaries. The Duke's son repeated that he had no right to tell the girl where she should live because she had the right to decide such matters herself. Then the rival accused him of holding her by force. This was already a serious accusation, and Enoch immediately tensed up internally, but he did not show it and said that it was not true. The owner of the house once again tried to explain to the guest that the former Leroy had made this decision herself, and no one had forced her to do anything, and no one was going to force her. Levan then accused the knight of holding her by playing on her feelings of pity and her desire to help the weak and powerless, which is outrageous behavior for an aristocrat. Enoch kept his composure and coldly noted that at the moment it was the ex-fiancé who was trying to force Leticia to make a decision, so he was not surprised that the girl had taken such a position. The son of the Marquis of Elam was shocked by this turn of the dialogue. He replied that this was not true, because he always cared about his former chosen one, and wished her only happiness and goodness. After a brief pause, the owner of the house recommended that Levan leave his mansion, because their conversation had clearly reached a dead end and therefore lost its meaning. The guest fell silent. He saw that he could not yet get what he wanted, since the Duke's son turned out to be a morally strong and intractable person. Then the guy sadly lowered his eyes and asked for forgiveness for his behavior, after which Levan stood up, adding that he really should leave, and headed towards the exit. The Duke's son silently followed his guest with a long and intent gaze. Meanwhile, in the city, where the fun of the youth group continued, Leticia could not resist and caught up with a guy who looked like her brother. The girl called out to Emil by name and he turned around. It was indeed the heir Leroy, she was not mistaken. The young man was very surprised when he saw his sister, but he did not say anything and just continued to stand silently opposite her. From an early age, the boy remembered that his first daughter always took care of others and tried to surround them with the highest level of care. The heir Leroy remembered well that Leticia sincerely helped her ailing mother and never expressed dissatisfaction or indignation about it. The boy liked to watch his older sister because she was always welcoming and friendly, but that was all in the past. Now Emil looked at his former relative with different eyes, and it was important to him that she had not awakened her abilities, which meant she had become a hindrance to the Leroy family. In addition, the young man really didn't like the fact that his sister had gotten involved with the poor losers of Achilles. In his opinion, it was simply terrible and shameful. The guy said that at first he refused to believe the rumors that Leticia went to the Duke's mansion, but now he sees that his worst fears were true. Leroy's ex replied that this was indeed the case, and she found shelter in this family, whom she had met quite recently. The brother noted that this was a rather strange decision, given their father Barrett's strong personal dislike for the head of the Achilles family. Suddenly, Leticia's face changed, and she said coldly that it was no longer her concern, and besides, Emil himself might not pay attention to it. The young man was very surprised by this answer, because he was used to the fact that at the slightest discomfort, his older sister obediently lowered her eyes to the floor and began to apologize. The girl took a step forward and looked her ex-brother straight in the eyes, and then added that the invisible connection that had been between them was no longer there, and their mutual obligations had disappeared. Leticia took a deep breath and noted that her life would no longer depend on the glorious Leroy family, but would go her own way, and they had lost the right to show her the way. Emil didn't answer. He just stood and looked at this girl, who today revealed herself to him in a completely different light. Then, the wisest of the Barrett children noticed that there was sense in her words, and he should not interfere with her new life, which was now in no way connected with his family. After a short silence, the guy said goodbye and went on about his business, and Leticia went her own way, which she could now choose independently, without regard for the constant reproaches of her household. And yet, the girl was sad, as one feels sad when one finishes reading a fascinating book and turns the last page. But the melancholy did not last long, because as soon as Emil had gone far enough, Leo threw herself on the noble woman's neck. The girl sternly said that they came to the city to have fun, and she would not allow her friend to be sad, no matter how serious the reason. Leticia immediately broke into a smile, thanked the heiress of Achilles, and added that she had not intended to be upset at all. Ian stood to the side and watched as his sister continued to hug their guest until she was sure that she really felt better. Meanwhile, strange things gradually began to happen in the Leroy mansion. Diana was walking down the steps and suddenly tripped. She managed to keep her balance and not fall, but she hit herself very painfully, so much so that she cried out loudly and even sat up. Xavier was nearby and immediately ran up to his sister, asking what had happened and how he could help her. The flower mistress showed her injured arm and noticed that she had dislocated her wrist, which she suddenly had to lean on to avoid falling down the stairs. The guy replied that she should take care of herself, especially that very hand that had recently been bandaged as a result of an injury received after Leticia's threats. Diana looked closely at her brother and remembered the performance she had put on in front of her father, so that he would kick his first daughter out of the house and deprive her of her family name. The girl quickly stood up, thanked him for his concern, and assured Xavier that she was already much better and that the injury had disappeared without a trace, so everything would be fine with her. Finding herself alone with herself, the flower mistress thought that this bad luck was just an accident, rare, but quite real. However, an image of their favorite cup, which their mother had broken the day before, immediately appeared in their head, and yet they had managed to successfully use and take care of the dishes for so many years. Diana walked and thought about the strange series of small and annoying troubles that had begun to happen to the heirs of Leroy recently. Suddenly, the girl stopped in the middle of the corridor from the thought that came to her mind. Perhaps she, the second daughter, had lost her luck, and now success was leaving their entire family. The next day, the weather at Achilles' mansion was beautiful. There was a light breeze and the sun was shining brightly. Leal came into the garden, spread out a light blanket and laid out her drawings, which she had been working hard on lately. Suddenly a shadow blocked the light, and a voice came from behind asking what the young lady was drawing. The girl shuddered in surprise and jerked violently. It turned out that it was Leticia, who had gone into the garden to find out what her friend was doing. The guest was embarrassed and began to apologize because she really did not want to frighten the girl with her sudden appearance. Leal asked if Ian or Enoch had come with her, to which the girl answered in the negative and asked what she was so engrossed in that she had not even heard her approach. The little girl put on a serious look and showed something unexpected, saying that this was not the first time she had drawn it. Then she quickly turned around and added that this was her secret, which she would only tell Leticia because she considered her older sister. On the grass lay sheets of paper with images of jewelry, and they had text captions describing the nuances of a particular item, as well as pictures of precious stones. The guest picked up the drawings and held them up to the light. She was amazed by the fine work of the craftswoman, who masterfully depicted stylish accessories. After which, the former daughter of the Marquis began to study the contents of the inscriptions more carefully and said that she already wanted to put such an artifact on her hand as soon as possible. The younger sister then added that she started drawing jewelry after she saw Leticia give her brother a gold-braided bracelet just before an exam. The girl suddenly felt sad. She remembered Levan, and Leal added that she herself wanted to give that thread, but she couldn't make it or buy it, so she was grateful for that gift. Suddenly, the former Leroy had an unexpected idea, and she said it out loud. Why shouldn't her new younger sister seriously take up making sketches for handmade jewelry? The teenage girl enjoyed drawing rings and pendants, but she never thought about turning the pictures into real objects that people could wear. Leticia pointed to a drawing of a bracelet and suggested imagining that Leal was putting the finished product on her hand and making a wish to become a famous owner of a jewelry store. The younger sister tried to object that it was just a drawing that did not fulfill wishes, but received the answer that the source of talents is hidden in our imagination. We just need to give it free rein. The former daughter of the Marquis added that these drawings are a manifestation of a strong desire, which means she only needs a little diligence and patience to achieve success in this direction. And while Leal listened to her older friend, a new, previously unfamiliar feeling awakened in her, which gave her strength and charged her with energy for new creations, accomplishments, and feats. The Duke's daughter ran her hand over the light cape on which she was sitting and declared that today she had understood a lot and now looked at her hobby differently, more seriously. Heiress Achilles stood up and pressed the drawings to her chest. Now she had a real goal in life, and she understood what she wanted and therefore decided to move in this direction. Leal smiled and said that before she just painted jewelry, but now she feels she can do much more because Leticia gave her confidence. The Marquis's former daughter laughed. She was pleased that the girl began to talk like an adult about goals, tasks, and plans for the future. And then the noblewoman asked in surprise why drawing was a secret that could not be told to the elder brother Enoch. Leal spoke about her father, the Duke, who often started different types of businesses, but ended up leaving behind a lot of debt, so she is afraid to tell her brother that she wants to start her own business. Leticia thought that the Achilles family must be having a hard time after the death of the head of the family, because they were left alone against the whole world and also mired in debt. Suddenly, a strong male voice called out to the friends, and they shuddered in surprise, and then turned around and saw the Duke's eldest son, who had come to find out what they were so enthusiastically doing. The youngest sister was the most frightened by Enoch's appearance. Of course, she planned to tell about her hobby someday, but she didn't think that it would happen today. Seeing the girl's reaction, the guy became wary and asked what was going on here and why they were behaving so strangely, as if they were hiding something from him. Leticia came to her senses first. She put her hand on Leal's shoulder and leaned towards her to tell her something very important. The guest whispered that a window of opportunity was now opening up for the heiress of Achilles. She just needed to gather her courage and take a step forward towards her dream. Talking about her innermost desires was difficult enough, and the young aristocrat spent some time trying to formulate a clear thought. Finally, Leal overcame her inner fear and said that she had long ago started drawing sketches of various jewelry items because she wanted to open her own business and become the owner of a jewelry store. Enoch was surprised by this revelation because he always considered his younger sister a cheerful dreamer, but not the founder of a serious business project. Meanwhile, the teenage girl added that she understands the responsibility of such a step and is ready to immerse herself in this business completely and without reserve so that the family ultimately makes a profit. The guy said that he was very glad that his younger sister showed concern for the well-being of their family, and that it was also an indicator of maturity of character and strength of will. Then the older brother added that the idea itself seemed interesting and promising to him, so he would definitely help his relative at the start of her project. After this, Enoch stroked his younger sister on the head, and then the girl realized that all her fears were in vain, because her family loved her and took her seriously. Leticia watched this scene silently. She really liked that Leal was able to overcome herself and tell everything, and also that the Duke's son perceived the situation wisely and adequately. However, this was not all that the young noblewoman wanted to say. She clutched her dress with her fingers in excitement and gathered her courage to tell her brother something else. The younger sister said that there was one more thing she wanted to ask the knight, so the boy removed his hand and prepared to listen to the young aristocrat to the end. The friends walked along the city street and chatted pleasantly. Leticia congratulated her younger sister on her first successes, and Leal thanked the guest for the advice and motivation that helped her start her own business. The Marquis's former daughter remarked that she had no idea that her adopted sister was so talented. The younger sister admitted that she was afraid of her brother's indignation, but he took it all so easily, even allowing them to use the resources of their old mine, where pink stones with impurities are mined. Leticia noted that the project was progressing quite quickly, since they had the drawings and raw materials. All that was left was to find a craftsman who could smelt the jewelry and then inlay it with stones. However, finding a person who would agree to take an active part in their business turned out to be not so easy. People simply refused. The jewelers the girls visited had their own reasons for refusing. Some were busy with other work, others did not believe in the success of the event, and still others simply shook their heads. Leal tried different methods of persuasion, and even tried to beg men to agree to a long-term order. Dusk had already fallen on the city, and the girls were still going from one workshop to another, receiving refusal after refusal, but Leticia said that they would definitely find a master, and he would be the best. Suddenly, a man ran out from around the corner. He was in a hurry and didn't even notice the two aristocrats standing in his way, and so he simply crashed into one of them. Leal fell to the ground and hit herself hard, and the stranger began to ask for forgiveness and helped the girl to her feet. An absent-minded passerby dropped an envelope exactly like the one his younger sister had, and the packages fell onto the pavement nearby, but having recovered, the courier and the noblewoman quickly picked them up from the ground. The man then apologized and, citing urgent business and the fact that he was in a hurry, quickly left. Leticia asked how Leal was feeling, but the girl smiled and replied that everything was fine and there was no need to worry about it. After walking a little further, the younger sister suggested that they finish searching and go home, because the day was already ending and the brothers might start to worry. The friends agreed that their adventures were over for today, but the next day they would continue searching for a suitable craftsman for a business project to create jewelry. At home, Ian and Enoch were sitting at the table. The guys immediately began to ask how the girls spent the day. Leal was a little embarrassed, but replied that they had had a wonderful time in the city, but had not yet been able to find a master who would agree to carry out this unusual order for them. Then the second brother began to tease his sister and said that he suspected that she would fail, but admitted that he was glad for her positive attitude despite the failure. Leticia watched this dialogue and happily noted that even when John accuses a relative of something, he does it with a smile and without any malice, but jokingly. Leal noticed that the adopted sister was still standing at the threshold and invited her to join the company to rest and regain her strength a little. However, there was only one free place at the table next to the Duke's eldest son, which embarrassed the girl because she was still embarrassed to be so close to her savior. The thought that she would be sitting next to the head of the Achilles clan could not fit into the noblewoman's head, and therefore she felt uneasy. But there was nowhere to go, and the aristocrat, overcoming her fear, nevertheless sat down on the sofa in close proximity to the knight. She felt very strange and uncomfortable. As Enoch poured a cup of tea, he remarked that the girl should not linger in the city for so long, because as soon as dusk fell on the city, he began to worry about them. The guy filled a container with aromatic tea and placed the dish directly in front of the Marquis's former daughter. The girl looked at the Duke's eldest son with gratitude and thought that hot tea would be very welcome now. Enoch was a very calm and reasonable man who knew how to take care of people and think ahead. Such an aristocrat should stand at the head of a noble family. Leticia was very pleased that the knight showed concern and spoke about it out loud. She was convinced of his kindness and responsiveness every day. Suddenly, Jan remembered that the solemn ceremony of knighthood was about to take place and asked why his brother was not at all worried. Enoch replied that if he could cope with the excitement during the exam, then it would be quite easy for him during the awards ceremony, and then invited the girl to come to the event. Leticia replied that she would be very pleased to be present at such an important event as the official knighthood of Sir Enoch Akalisu. Then the younger brother noticed the folder with the works and asked if he could look at the sketches again. Leal agreed, and the boy reached for the envelope with the drawings. However, when the young man opened it, he was surprised to find some kind of contract there instead of sketches of jewelry. The heiress Achilles looked at the stranger's papers with horror and could not believe her eyes because there was not a single sketch in the folder. The girl immediately remembered the situation that happened in the evening in the city when an unfamiliar man ran into her and he had a similar folder in his hands. And at this time, that same inattentive courier was already hurrying to his master to give him the important papers he had been sent for. And when the owner began to look through the documents, he was very surprised, because there was not at all what he expected to receive. The man shouted at his assistant that he was supposed to bring the contract, but instead he brought God knows what. Then the man suddenly fell silent and began to carefully examine the sheets of paper where beautiful sketches of jewelry were drawn. At this point, the courier put the facts together and realized that he had accidentally exchanged folders during a recent encounter with an unknown lady. The servant immediately confessed to his master that it was his fault and told him of the incident that had taken place when he had mistakenly taken an envelope belonging to a young aristocrat. The man replied that the contract was very important to him, so the assistant was obliged to immediately go looking for it in order to return the lost item as quickly as possible. Then the stranger turned his gaze to the images and thought that the sketches really deserved attention, because he had never seen anything like them before. After looking at the pictures, the owner turned his attention to the accompanying texts and liked both the descriptions and the names of the luxury items. The man had a good understanding of jewelry, so he immediately began to think about how to refine the images and soon came to the conclusion that these products would sell well and have a certain success. The master ran after the servant because a new idea came into his head. which he decided, at all costs, to implement in practice. The owner ordered the courier to find out who the author of these drawings was and to offer that unknown lady a business meeting with him. Leal sat on the sofa next to her brother and thought out loud about what she should do to get her sketches back, but Jan suggested that they go to bed and start looking for the absent-minded passerby in the morning. The relatives went to sleep in their rooms, each thinking about the event that had taken place. Enoch looked at his relatives and said that it was really too late, and they should follow the example of the heirs of Aquilas. However, Leticia raised her hand and asked the owner of the house to stay a little longer because she wanted to share something with him. Leroy's ex said she had a strange feeling that she found hard to put into words. The knight replied that she could share any thoughts she had with him, and he promised that he would perceive everything correctly and adequately. The girl lowered her eyes and added that she felt as if Levan had come to this house again while she and Liel were working on the jewelry project in the city. Enoch noticed that being excluded from Leroy's family tree did not destroy the connection between the former bride and groom. He sees that the young people continue to think about each other often. Leticia replied that it was true because you can't forget in one day someone you've been friends with since early childhood and about whom you've thought for years as a future spouse. The noblewoman continued that during this time they had indeed created a serious relationship, but now it was all over and there was no turning back, and this made her sad and uneasy. The Marquis's former daughter added that recently the guy she loved and was happy with had changed a lot. Levan became cold and cruel. He stopped understanding her and began to say terrible words that caused her incredible pain, destroying their connection. The aristocrat noticed that with each passing month they were becoming more and more distant from each other, and the entire initiative for this break initially came from the son of the Marquis of Elem. Enoch listened attentively to Leticia's story and thought about how much she had to endure and how much she suffered about it, although she did not show it. After thinking for a moment, the knight replied that during her absence, Levan had not visited this house, and the girl said that this was good, and now she could go to bed with relief. But the guy stopped her and added that he also wanted to tell her something important. The girl looked at the owner of the house and said that she would be happy to listen to him. The knight noted that if someone ever caused her physical or mental harm, she should not keep it deep inside herself and hide it behind a smile. Leticia was very surprised, because even close relatives in the years of love and respect never told her such words of sincere care. After this short phrase spoken by Enoch, the girl felt very light and free in her heart. Then the noblewoman raised her hands and said that she had a personal request. The aristocrat added in a quiet voice that she was no longer a member of the Leroy family, and therefore asked that she no longer be called Lady Leroy, but that she be addressed by her first name. Then the girl quickly added that, of course, the owner of the house can call her whatever he sees fit. But deep down, the Marquis's former daughter dreamed that Enoch would start calling her by her first name. The Duke's son smiled slightly and called Leticia as she wished, and then added that he himself liked this form of address much better than the previous one. The noblewoman was pleasantly surprised by this answer. She thought that the knight preferred a formal style in his dialogue with her. Enoch then suggested that the Marquis's former daughter might also call him by his first name, avoiding mention of his status and surname. However, the girl took this idea negatively. She said that events were moving too fast for one day, and she should take a nap and then think carefully about this topic. The knight laughed and replied that she had as much time as she needed, and no one was going to rush her. Enoch wished the girl good night and said that he should also get some sleep. Before leaving, the young man noted that Leticia could always turn to him and tell him about anything she wanted. The guy paused at the very door and looked at his guest with an affectionate gaze, and then he laughed and called the girl by name again. It was clear that the knight was doing this with undisguised pleasure. The aristocrat looked at the Duke's son as if enchanted. She had no idea that it could be so pleasant when he said her name. Leticia was very embarrassed, because with each such episode she began to feel deeper and deeper feelings for the man who had sheltered her in his home. When the guy left, the girl continued to stand alone in the middle of the spacious room and was embarrassed by her feelings. The noblewoman had never experienced anything like this before. Although Levan had been in her life and they had communicated quite closely, they drank tea, walked, and had fun, but she had never met a person like Enoch. The story then moves to the Leroy family mansion, where Mr. Sayos has returned after a long absence. The man was extremely outraged by the news that his friend Barrett had kicked the unfortunate girl out of the house and also deprived her of her status and surname. The Marquis objected that he had to do so because Leticia could destroy his entire family and put an end to the glorious Leroy dynasty. The guest replied that he had done a lot of work and talked to the magicians in the tower and could say with confidence that if the first daughter had brought trouble, then Leroy would already be dead. Barrett recalled his conversation with Diana and her arm injury, which occurred after her older sister wished for her to suffer. Then the man mentioned that Leticia had stopped listening to him and had gotten involved with the hereditary losers of the Achilles, thereby ruining the reputation of the entire family. Mr. Sayos leaned forward and said that he certainly respected his friend, but he could not just watch him confuse cause and effect and believe in rumors and legends. Barrett raised his voice and replied that these were his children, and he knew better what was happening in his family, so he was convinced that Leticia brought harm and misfortune, and Diana brought success and good luck. Seeing that the dialogue was approaching a conflict, the family friend pulled himself together and continued in a calm voice that he was ready to swear that the first daughter was devoid of any negative abilities. The Marquis valued the wisdom of his older comrade and always listened to his words. But now it was difficult for him because they had completely opposite opinions on this issue. Suddenly, his thoughts were interrupted by a woman's scream, to which the head of the family stood up and asked what was going on. There was a guy in a Magic Academy uniform standing near the gate, explaining to Irene that her exam form had not been submitted on time, so the administration had decided to expel her. The girl continued to demand a review of the results because she was sure that she had passed the exam and personally placed the document on the commission's table. The young man said that he would try to help her and offered to go with him straight to the academy to sort things out on the spot and find the missing paper. The Marquis was very surprised by this situation because an educational magical institution is clearly not the kind of place where documents can disappear without a trace. The next minute, Xavier's servant ran up from the other side and began to tell something about his young master. It turns out that the young man was practicing horse riding, but at some point he lost control of the situation and fell off his horse, resulting in an injury. Barrett couldn't believe his ears, because his son was not only an experienced warrior, but also an excellent horseman who professionally handled any horses. The Marquis immediately forgot about everything in the world and rushed after the guy into Xavier's room, where he should have been brought by now. Mr. Sayos was aware of how good the heir Leroy was at handling a horse, but he said nothing and only continued to watch the events happening around his friend's family. From the servants' conversations, the man knew that a couple of days ago the Marquis's wife had injured her hand and broken her favorite cup. Diana then tripped on the stairs and injured her wrist. And now the events that happened today, right before Sayos's eyes, all of this came together to form one complete picture, and it seemed to the man that in just a little while he would understand the reason for these failures. The gray-haired old man began to compare the facts in his head, and suddenly his eyes widened because he realized what had happened. Leticia really does have an ability, but no one even suspected what it was. While she was part of the family, everyone perceived success and luck as a natural state, but as soon as the girl was kicked out of the house, it immediately became obvious that she was the keeper of the family. The former daughter of the Marquis walked along the long corridor of the building and looked into the spaces between the wide columns. She thought about Enoch, the man who changed her life and extended a helping hand in her most difficult moment. Most often, the girl recalled the knight's phrase that she should not keep her experiences to herself, but needed to express them so that they would not accumulate in her heart and cause pain. The noblewoman also recalled how her savior walked, behaved in front of people, and even turned his head during a conversation. Leroy's ex never tired of admiring what a good, kind, and caring person he is, who always perceives people correctly and accepts them as they are. The girl closed her eyes and asked herself why she didn't experience such feelings when she was near Levan, although he also called her by name and at first showed care and concern. The aristocrat felt that she was changing quickly, beginning to feel something that had not been there before. It simultaneously frightened and inspired her. Then the girl stopped, took her head in her hands and thought about why she was so busy with her inner world and feelings, because before this had not attracted her attention. Soon, Leal and Jan returned from the city. They tried to find the envelope with the sketches, or at least that clumsy man who did not look in front of him when he ran, but nothing came of it. The younger sister said that they returned to the very place where the collision occurred and then walked around for a long time, but it did not help. Heiress Achilles added that there was a very important contract in their folder, so the courier should also look for them, so she hopes that they will meet soon. Then Leticia saw Leal offer her brother some tea after the journey, but he refused and said that he would rather stay in his room. The girl noticed that John had been acting strangely lately and decided to find out what had happened. The young man had indeed been sad for several days now and tried to get away from others at every opportunity. Perhaps something unpleasant was happening in his life. The guest decided that she must, at any cost, help Enoch's younger brother, and so she followed him to his room and knocked on the door. The guy was very surprised to see Leticia on the threshold of his apartment and asked what happened, to which the girl replied that she wanted to come in and talk to him. The small room was clean and cozy, the objects were in their places and created the atmosphere of a business office. The girl noticed the books that were lying on the shelf, and then assumed that Yang was going to enter the civil service in the Helios Empire. The young man replied that it was just literature, so she shouldn't pay attention to it. Leticia noticed that these manuscripts were usually used to prepare for exams, so she came to this conclusion, but if this is not so, then why does he need them? Enoch's younger brother reached for a book on the shelf and replied that he was, of course, interested in the imperial service, but not because he enjoyed it, but because it was his duty. Jan smiled and added that there weren't many ways to get ahead in this world, and he had to choose from what was available. The guy noticed that his family was counting on him, so he should do at least something useful and right. Then the young man remembered his sister and said that sometimes she makes him envious because she has a goal, a desire, and the prospect of realizing her dream, and he doesn't even know what he wants from life. Leticia looked down and thought that in this she and Jan were very similar because she also went with the flow and had no idea what her calling and purpose were. The girl remembered the long days spent poring over books in search of an answer to the main question of her life. What is her ability? It's sad to watch others change their lives, strive for something, achieve results, and rise high to the top, and you look at them and don't understand where your ladder is. Suddenly, a phrase was born inside Leticia, which she immediately conveyed to Jan, that his sister does not know how to create jewelry masterpieces. She is simply sincerely passionate about what she really likes. And then the noblewoman added that she herself had not yet found her calling, just like Enoch's younger brother, so she suggested that they work together to find an occupation to their liking. Suddenly the guy froze in place, as if he was numb, and only repeated to himself the phrase he had just heard, "Do what you like." Then the young man closed his eyes and smiled. He was thinking about something that had been bothering his heart for a long time. Finally, Jan came to his senses and laughed, and then said that he now understood why Leal considered Leticia her sister and best friend. The noblewoman looked at the Duke's youngest son in surprise and asked what he meant. The young man replied that it was all about the support that their guest gave to each of them, and then happily agreed to start searching for his purpose. The aristocrat was very pleased to see how this sad and depressed guy turned into a smiling and confident young man in just a few minutes. Leticia thought that moral support can really be very important and decided that she would definitely find her purpose and place in life where she would be truly happy. At last, the day of the solemn investiture arrived, so the lady dressed herself in her best and went downstairs to wait at the door of the house for the rest of the Duke's heirs. Soon Leal appeared. She happily waved her hand and hurried to join her friend. Leticia asked if her younger sister had managed to get enough sleep, to which she replied that she had been so stressed that she had not even been able to fall asleep. Then the young heiress Achilles asked in surprise where her brothers were, since she had expected that they would already be downstairs. Remembering that she had forgotten something in her room, Leal ran back and said that she would go get Jan, and Leticia should go to Enoch and hurry him so that they would not be late. The former daughter of the Marquis agreed and went to the part of the house where the knight's room was located. The girl knocked politely on the door and, having received permission, entered the room. The head of the family, wearing a dress uniform, stood in the middle of the room and sheepishly showed his sleeve, on which a button had come off. Leticia really liked the appearance of the owner of the house. He reminded her of a prince from a fairy tale, so she was blinded by his brilliance and did not immediately understand what he was telling her. The guy repeated his words again and raised his hand higher, showing the place where the button should be. But the noblewoman still did not hear the knight. She was admiring the beauty of his ceremonial attire. Finally, Enoch stopped smiling and looked at the guest who had entered with bewilderment. Suddenly, the girl came to her senses and realized that she had not listened to the young man at all, although he had told her something important, and she strained to remember the details. Finally, Leticia understood what the knight was trying to tell her and immediately rushed to help with clothes. The aristocrat quickly figured out the problem and began to correct the situation so that the military uniform would be fully ready for the ceremonial event. While finishing her preparations, the girl noticed on the owner of the house's wrist the same gold bracelet that she had given him before the exam. The girl said that the exam had long since passed and Enoch could take off the decoration since it was prepared only for a specific occasion, to which the knight replied that he had long ago noticed the fact that as soon as he puts on the accessory, everything around him starts to happen in the best possible way, so he wears it almost always. Leticia was very pleased to hear such words, because she made this bracelet with the best wishes, even if it was for Levan. The noblewoman thought about what a big role this modest decoration played in the life of her savior, and then the girl said that she thought it was right to take off the bracelet and not wear it for some time. Enoch was very surprised to hear such advice. And when the duke's eldest son asked why he should do this, the girl dropped her hands and replied that this decoration did not suit him. The owner of the house did not know how to react to such a remark and therefore chose to simply remain silent. The pause dragged on, and it was necessary to somehow get out of the situation. Then the knight said that he did not want to take off the bracelet. And when Leticia asked why he decided so, Enoch replied that this talisman would tell everyone around him that the knight of the Achilles family has a loved one who wishes him well.